Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing great. Welcome back to the Anime Fictions 2.0. Today, we're diving into part 5 of What If Naruto Konohas Lost Soul. One decision, one technique, and everything changes. If you enjoy alternate timelines and stories that push canon in unexpected directions, make sure to subscribe, share the video with your friends, and check out the other videos on the channel. And as always, drop your thoughts in the comments. I love reading your ideas. Now, without any more delay, let's jump straight into the story. Chapter 48, The Siege of Sakai, Final Cut. Naruto stood before the ninja, each with their eyes fixated on him, a burning fire of revenge burning within most of them, the silent promise of killing him, ever visible. He looked to each of them, waiting for one of them to make the first move, and he wasn't soon disappointed, as the pink-haired one threw several kunai, each moving rather quickly through the air. Turning only slightly, he carelessly batted them away with a wave of his armored hand, the one holding his flaming sword, using his free hand to catch Inuzuka's kick to his ribs a second later. He threw the girl off, ducking under Yoshihiro's hammer swing as he simultaneously spun back around, swinging his blade to strike the large man's leg, only to watch as sparks flew as his blade, wrapped in red-hot flames, his sword met tempered steel plate instead of flesh. Yoshihiro growled, moving to kick the boy only for Naruto to leap up, landing behind the Tsuchikage before spinning around again, only for his sword of flame to be caught by a fist of stone. Yoshihiro spun around, keeping his grip firm as he swung his own weapon with his free hand in a wide arc, aiming for Naruto's side. To his and everyone else's surprise, however, the blonde merely raised his own hand and caught the hammer's head, letting out a small grunt of effort as he tightened his grip over the weapon. Yoshihiro's eyes narrowed. He knew the boy was strong, but this was getting ridiculous. The Tsuchikage then noticed a few, however slight distortions in the air surrounding Naruto, and it only took him a second to recognize what they were before he was cut to pieces. Vanishing in a cloud of smoke a moment later, revealing a log. Naruto went to move, but a shadow held him in place. His eyes traveled to the shadow user, Chuji appearing above him a moment later, his shattered arm held in a tight sling Sakura had made quickly to get him back in the fight. The Akimic visibly fought against the pain as his enlarged fist headed straight towards Naruto. The blonde allowed his eye to travel towards Shikamaru, who was again visibly struggling against the strain of keeping him still. The blonde's eyes flashed a brighter red again as his killing intent flared. Shikamaru offered a moment of resistance before he collapsed again, leaving Naruto with only a single split second of time left to escape Chuji's attack as the Akimichi's massive fist slammed down into the area he previously occupied. His speed made him seem little more than a blur, as he made a mad dash towards the shadow user, ready to destroy what was most likely the most problematic of his opponents. Shikamaru! He heard the faint cry of worry reach his ears but paid little attention to the fools behind him, and focused solely on Nara. When he was close, however, he saw the shadow wielder smirk before he leapt straight up, the earth exploding beneath him a moment later, revealing the Yamanaka girl, a dark smirk plastered over her own features as she looked straight into his eyes. She threw her arms wide open, letting out a loud screech, one that made Naruto stop his charge, clutching his ears in pain, and even the nearby Shikamaru winced as the scream reached a level that would burst eardrums. There was a pulse of chakra from the girl before she collapsed, being caught by Shikamaru before she fully fell. Naruto felt her presence enter his mind, growling as he struggled to fight her off, watching as his hands slowly went down to his kunai pouch. The others of the group watched on, as Ino's face contorted with pain as the last vestiges of her subconscious mind displayed the struggle her conscious mind was currently waging with the Jinchuriki. Each hesitant to attack, not knowing if this technique was like other Yamanaka techniques where the damage received in the vessel would damage the user's actual body. Naruto fell to one knee, his growls growing in volume as his hand tightened into a tight fist, and slowly ran his metal-covered thumb over the golden wristbands, releasing a bit of his blood through special openings onto them, watching as one of the 5 seals glowed and burned off before he gathered chakra, the burning feeling forming the pit of his stomach and spreading out. A visible red haze forming over his body before it exploded outwards. Ino's eyes flew open and she let out strangled gasp as her mind was forcefully pushed out. She arched her back before the tense muscles relaxed and she fell against Shikamaru, panting and sweating as her eyes, still smoldering with deep hatred, passed back to Naruto, who stood back up, red chakra receding back into the seal. He glared at the 2 shinobi before he shot forward, the rest of the ninja behind him giving chase a moment later as they tried to catch up. Shikamaru drew 2 kunai, throwing Ino behind him as she had not yet fully recovered from the backlash of her own technique. Close combat and speed were never the shadow user's strengths, however, and Naruto was soon upon him. Red flashed before his eyes as he put up whatever resistance he could. In seconds, the Devil King systematically disarmed him and delivered 5 solid punches to the boy's face, stomach, and chest before he grabbed him and held him up by the scruff of his shirt, rearing back his blade as he prepared to impale the shadow user. "Shikamaru!" Chuji roared, the fear for his friend almost palpable as he rushed forward even faster than before. Sakura appeared at the Jinchuriki's side, chakra scalpel in hand as she moved to thrust it into his kidneys, only for her to catch sight of a minor distortion in the wind and pulled her hand back in time to merely receive a minor cut on her arm, instead of having it lobbed off entirely. "Kamaichi!" Temari suddenly yelled, launching her attack at Naruto's back, hoping to stop him. Naruto calmly turned his head, before he turned around fully, hefting Shikamaru by his neck so the shadow user formed a type of human shield. He could easily kill the shadow user himself and get out of the way, but using him in such a manner would not only anger his comrades, making them clumsy and careless, it may also make the wind using kunoichi hesitate in the future. Temari's eyes widened. "No!" she yelled, looking at each of her wind blades. She extended her hands, forming what little chakra strings she could, and intercepted 5 of the wind blades, 5 that she knew would hit vital spots on the shadow user's form. Sakura, since she couldn't see the blades as well as she could, merely vague distortions of the air wouldn't be able to help. And so she, along with the others, could do little more than watch as the blades rush headlong towards the wrong opponent. Naruto waited until he was certain the full gravity of what happened had sunk in, before he callously threw Shikamaru to the side, watching as he rolled to a stop, unmoving. Blades had sliced open his thighs, back, arms, and legs, each wound bleeding horribly. Ino stumbled to her feet and rushed to his side, Sakura, giving the red-robed Kage a wide berth as she did the same, leaving Naruto to face the remaining 4 ninja. Chuji looked at the limp, unmoving form of his best friend. Bow rose in his throat as he felt like throwing up. That feeling was soon replaced, however, by rage. Blinding, bubbling rage which rose from his stomach, extending to every extremity of his body as he glared at the ninja. His anger grew with every passing second as he simply stood there, blade held firmly in his hand, completely uncaring, devoid of emotion, a blank slate, a void, a monster. Chuji could barely see straight as he growled, slamming his hand into the ground. Earth gathered around it, forming numerous spikes throughout his whole fist. He rushed the blonde, not even registering Yoshihiro's cry for him to stop. Naruto easily weaved around the attacks, watching as the large Akimichi swung his club-like fist around in his wild attempts to hit him, leaving several glaring openings in his defenses, one of which he swiftly took advantage of, appearing behind the Akimichi, his still flaming sword held firmly in his grip, held across his chest before he let it fall back to his side. Chuji paused, frozen for a brief moment before blood slowly began dribbling from his lips, down to his chin, and down his neck, staining the clothing beneath his armor, which soon fell away, revealing dozens of large, cauterized gashes across his chest, stomach, ribs, and back. Injuries that did not take a genius to deduce what produced them. The large ninja fell to his knees, before he fell to the floor entirely, his eyes closing as darkness overcame him. "Foolish," Naruto muttered. "Yeah, you are." A familiar, cold voice came from behind him. Turning, he found Yoshihiro, before the man swung his hammer, intending to crush his skull with the blunt weapon. As the weapon smashed his head to bits, spraying blood and brain matter everywhere, it was no real surprise to anyone that the blonde vanished in a cloud of smoke a second later. "Katan Kaze no Ryu!" The earth shook beneath their feet, and the ground beneath Yoshihiro slowly began to glow red-hot, slowly growing in size, and the old man only had a scant few seconds to react as he realized what was happening. Forming his hand seals and slamming his hammer onto the floor, creating massive spikes to form all around him before they each convened over him, forming a tight cocoon, a massive dragon exploded from the ground beneath his feet a moment later. The heat from the creature was by far the most intense any had felt before, and nearby wooden buildings nearly 50 feet away combusted along the edges closest to the rising flame dragon. Wind distortions along its length around it made it obvious to Temari's trained eye that it had also been imbued with wind chakra. She swallowed down her fear, watching as the beast coiled and twisted in the air as it hovered over the city, the stone cocoon caught within its jaws, visible cracks forming along it as the heat dried the earth until it was brittle and the wind cut into its shell. Hana, Temari, Ino and Sakura watched in fear as more cracks and snaps reached their ears, each praying that Yoshihiro's shield would hold against the assault, but to their horror, the dragon's jaws snapped shut. Earth, burning red-hot, fell like the crumbs of a cookie from its mouth and smashed against the floor, picking up dust and crushing anything unfortunate enough to be beneath it. The dragon of flame and wind roared again before it finally dissipated, but the heat did not. Much of the nearby buildings had been lit, and the flames were now spreading throughout the city. Footsteps reached Temari's ear and she looked to where the dragon had initially risen from, and found the form which would now forever be one with her nightmares, rising as if from the depths from hell itself, the blade still firmly gripped in his hands. Naruto's hand suddenly reached out to his side again, stopping Yoshihiro's hammer strike with his bare hand. Turning his head, he looked at the face of the Tsuchikage, a large chunk of the right side of his chest plate missing, along with several other deep gashes along his arms, legs, and one across his cheek, along with several burns marring his tanned skin. Naruto roughly shoved the man off, making him stumble. As the Tsuchikage regained his footing, he turned to Naruto, ready to defend, or deliver an attack, but it was to be for naught as the boy raised his sword and cut the air between them. Bankir no Shuha. He spoke the name of his jutsu, watching as Yoshihiro's eyes widened and his mouth opened, releasing a cry of shock and pain before flames swept over him, an explosion tearing up the earth at his feet a moment later, sending him flying back. Earth met sky as the man felt the war hammer slip through his fingers, the heat making his heavy metal armor feel as if it was cooking him for a moment before his form was finally thrown from the blast radius. He slammed against the side of a building, wood, brick and clay collapsing over him as darkness consumed him utterly. Temari grit her teeth, settling herself in a defensive stance as Naruto turned his attention from Yoshihiro back to them. She spoke to the Inuzuka girl over her shoulder. "Hana, we have to pull back. Summon your 9 dogs to get everyone out of here safely." Hana let out a growl, shoving down the disgust in her throat at the thought of having to retreat from this monster again, but realized that indeed, as they would be killed, and her brother still needed medical attention, as did Chuji and Shikamaru. Biting her thumb, she formed her hand seals and soon 3 large, horse-like dogs appeared around her in plumes of smoke. "Get them out of here, I'll hold him off." Temari spoke again, taking a small, unconscious step back as Naruto began walking towards them again. "I'm not about to lead a dash." "Just do it!" The Wind Mistress yelled as she grabbed a scroll from her pouch. Unrolling it, its contents appeared in a plume of smoke, revealing another fan which the girl used to take to the skies. Hovering several yards above before she let loose with another volley of wind blades as Hana and her summons vanished. With a wave of his hand, the Jinchuriki manipulated the air around him, dispelling Temari's own wind blades before they ever got close. Allowing his eyes to travel skyward, finding her standing above another of her fans, the first one which she still held firmly in her hands ready to release her next attack if need be. The kitsune growled slowly in his throat, forming his hand seals while the blade was still firmly gripped in his hand. "Hasiba!" He finished his hand seals, spinning once to his right, followed swiftly by another spin to his left, his blade dragging across the floor around him. Sparks rose from the ground around him, a perfect circle. He shifted his stance, spreading his legs wide apart, holding his blade somewhat behind him as his clawed hand was held in front of him. Faint wisps of chakra visibly flowing from his palm, down to the earth beneath his feet. Temari watched, a slow feeling of dread crawling up and down her throat from her stomach. "It can't be," she thought with horror gripping her heart as the chunk of earth the Jinchuriki was standing on was visibly pulled loose from the rest of the soil. A perfect, semicircular chunk of earth rose slowly, picking up speed the higher it got, and she was forced to accept that it was being held up by wind power alone. Her fan was built for this sort of use. Wind chakra flowed through and around it easily. It also caught the wind easily, providing lift with relatively minimal effort. It was also very light in comparison to its size. To lift a chunk of earth, which depending on the density of the stone could have weighed anywhere from 50 to 120 pounds with just wind pressure, it shouldn't even be considered remotely possible. The sheer chakra and control over the wind necessary for that type of raw, brute force power was not even human. Not to mention the fact that he was not cutting the stone he was standing on. Naruto rose high above the ground, never stopping in his ascent until he was standing at eye level with the still shocked Wind Mistress. Temari gritted her teeth, unrolling another scroll, making her large fan, which she used as her primary weapon, disappear, before she unrolled another scroll. 2 plumes of smoke escaping this one, revealing 2 smaller bladed fans. These weapons provided a quicker succession of attacks, but much less power. It seemed her opponent was quite determined to meet her up close and personal, so she would have to hold her own with these. Naruto stared at the Wind Mistress, glowing red eyes meeting fierce silvery blue before his form streaked through the sky. Temari waved both her fans, sending more wind blades which were again dispelled by the blonde Jinchuriki. For Temari, at the sight of such a thing, her hope of any victory at all was growing bleaker and bleaker. If he could still dispel her long-range wind techniques while manipulating such an extremely advanced wind technique to keep himself levitated, then this man was beginning to seem less like a human and more like the demon everyone claimed him to be. So, fully giving up on long range, she snapped both fans shut, shifted them into a reverse grip, and formed 2 clearly visible blade-like extensions. She allowed herself to glance briefly towards her friends, who were placing Chuji, Shikamaru and Kiba onto Hana's summons and could only pray that the Inuzuka girl would listen to her and run. The blade-like extensions to her fans were nearly a foot long each. She tightened her grip on them before she met his charge with her own. Naruto unsheathed his second blade, and cut off his fire chakra from the first, channeling wind chakra into both blades as he met Temari in mid-air. Their chakra-formed blades clashing with howling sounds instead of the usual metal on metal. Temari looked from the corner of her eye as Hana and her summoned dogs leaped over the buildings and made their escape. Hana, with Ino's help, heaved Chuji's massive form onto one of her summons, Sakura placing Kiba onto another. Shikamaru was already on his own. She walked over to the animal who carried Kiba before she gripped his mane, and leapt onto him herself. "Get on, we're leaving!" "But what about Temari?" Sakura questioned with worry as she allowed her eyes to travel up to said Wind Mistress, as the Jinchuriki also rose up above the ground, standing on a floating stone platform. Hana growled, feeling torn between helping her friend and doing as she had been ordered. As she looked at the Wind Mistress, seeing her bravely stand her ground against a monster that had all but demolished them, she wanted to, oh gods how she wanted to stand beside her. But she knew that if she did not leave now, they would most likely be witnessing their last battle. And so, turning, she ordered her mount to ride off, at full speed, praying that her wind-wielding friend would indeed be able to catch up to them later. Temari let out a startled cry as Naruto swung both blades. She raised her own wind blades, gritting her teeth against the force of the attack. She tried to hold her ground, but soon, the sheer power behind the Jinchurikis swung through her off her standing platform. "Katon Ryuka!" Naruto spoke before he blew out a stream of fire through his mask, which quickly took up the form of 3 fire dragons which dived straight down to the ground, dispersing as they made contact in the unwavering surface, spreading fire throughout the whole courtyard at their feet. Temari's eyes widened in momentary panic as she beheld the sea of flames she was currently falling towards. But she soon recovered her level-headedness and opened her 2 small fans before throwing them away, manipulating their trajectory with a mixture of wind manipulation and chakra strings, placing them beneath her feet where she manipulated the air again and was soon hovering safely above the flames. She threw out another group of chakra strings towards her other larger fan which had also been falling to the inferno below before she yanked it towards herself, catching it from the air, snapping it open before she replaced it with the fans at her feet and looked back above to where she Naruto should still be. But to her surprise the blonde was not there anymore, and she merely found the now falling stone platform. She didn't need to wonder where he went for very long as she felt a weight which forced her fan to shift suddenly. Cold sweat dripped down her face as she swallowed a lump that rose in her throat before she hesitantly turned her head, daring to steal a glance behind her, only to find the familiar red cloak and hood standing directly behind her. Temari ducked, narrowly avoiding the blade that passed over her head as she did. She spun around on her heel, her foot approaching the rather precarious edge of the fan as she did, attacking with an upward slash with one of her wind blades, which was blocked by Naruto's own. The Jinchuriki raised his other blade over his head, and swung, bringing it down on the Wind Mistress, who quickly raised her own blade to block. The force of the attack forced her blade down, however, eliciting a scream of pain from the woman as the razor-sharp edge sliced deep into her shoulder. She didn't have too much time to focus on it, however, as a kick connected harshly with her side, throwing her off her fan and into the tiled roof of a second-story building nearby. The Suna Kunoichi rolled onto her stomach, painfully picking herself up, ignoring the blood that escaped her lips as she painfully gripped her side. Her ribs were probably bruised from that last hit, breathing was becoming painful and the blood loss, from her shoulder, which was nearly twice as bad as it would normally be due to the extremely razor-like sharpness of the blade, was beginning to make her vision swim. There was a crash next to her, and she painfully turned her head, finding the familiar leather boots standing above broken and cracked roof tiles. Naruto watched the kunoichi for a moment, observing her labored breathing and trying to identify the vague familiarity he felt as he looked at her. He really couldn't place it, but decided that because she fought and showed such familiarity with those escaped survivors of the genocide 9 years ago, that she was most likely from one of those families. Paying it no mind, the Jinchuriki raised his blade above his head again, ready to bring it down on the girl one final time. But as his arm came down, there was a rumble beneath him. Shortly before the roof exploded from beneath his feet, a pillar of earth throwing him high into the air, disoriented from the sudden attack. Yoshihiro suddenly appeared above him, his battered, bruised, and burnt form breathing heavily. Nonetheless, he reared his hammer back and with a mighty swing, slammed it into the flying form of the Kyuubi, sending him plummeting towards the earth, or rather towards another building which the blonde plowed right through. Yoshihiro formed several quick hand seals, strapping the hammer to his back before several fireballs formed in the palms of his hand. Pitching them into the hole the Jinchuriki made into the building, watching as a glow from within grew brighter and brighter before it exploded outwards, crumbling the building to dust as the attack enveloped it in a massive fireball. The Tsuchikage landed next to Temari, ignoring the pain coursing through his body as he lifted the girl to her feet, holding her until her legs again supported her standing form. "Get out of here, kid, I'll hold him off." Budash. "No buts, this was Iwa's fight, never yours to begin with." The old man spoke firmly. Temari nodded weakly before she unrolled the scroll holding another spare fan. Stepping onto it, as she sent one last glance to the old Tsuchikage before she took back to the skies, leaving the trade city of Sakai behind. Soon after she was gone, the Tsuchikage was forced to shield himself from flying debris as a massive, freak tornado blew through the area where he had thrown the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Yoshihiro tensed as he unclasped his hammer from his back again, taking up his fighting stance as he prepared for the Kyuubi Jinchuriki to emerge from the smoldering rubble. But Naruto did not emerge from the collapsed building. Instead, the blonde exploded from the floor behind the Tsuchikage, wood and shattered tiles flying everywhere as twin, wind-empowered scimitars were already mid-thrust. Yoshihiro's eyes widened in alarm, realizing too late that the ninja had merely used the tornado and debris as a diversion. He wouldn't have time to dodge or replace himself with something. Gritting his teeth, the Tsuchikage closed his eyes, awaiting the inevitable pain. He was not disappointed, as blinding, white-hot fire exploded from his back and chest as two blades pierced him through and through. Coughing up blood, the Tsuchikage tried a blind swing behind him with his hammer, only for the weapon to be kicked out of his now feeble grip as Naruto twisted the blades within him. The blonde, though he would never admit it, was impressed with the Kage. Unlike what he had previously seen from the Kage of Kiri and the leader of Kusazuraki, this man was not only strong, he also placed the lives of his ninja before his own. He reminded Naruto of Sarutobi somewhat, who would also rather be the first to die than to abandon any of his ninja. He had seen him let the blonde kunoichi escape, opting to stay behind himself, and even when he ordered the retreat, he could have easily left his Toppanbu or some other lieutenant behind to pick up the slack. Instead, he had chosen to stay behind himself. Not only that, for a man his age he was incredibly durable, being able to withstand two of his more damaging techniques, as well as two swords in him, and he still was not dead. Yoshihiro let out a dry chuckle, blood spilling from his lips, down his chin and onto his chest. "Damn, ain't this a bitch? I developed a technique in preparation to face you, but I never got a chance to use it." He looked over his shoulder, his bloody teeth making themselves known as he smiled at the Jinchuriki. "Well, I guess if I gotta die, it's nice to know I'll be killed by the man who sought out to conquer the world." Pulling out his blades, Naruto let the old man fall to the tiled floor in an armored heap, groaning slightly in pain. Naruto walked forward, placing himself to the old man's side where he'd be able to cut his head off easier. But before he ever made the attack, a battle cry behind him brought his attention away from the downed Kage. Spinning back around, he blocked a spear thrust delivered by another IWA ninja, this one with similar armor to Yoshihiro, but certainly much younger than the Kage. Several more Umbu arrived around him, each throwing down smoke bombs. Naruto knew what they were after, and let them have it. It made no real difference now. IWA would be his in a matter of days. As the smoke cleared, Naruto watched the IWA Umbu leap back over the wall, their leader carried with them before he turned and began walking back to his own camp. This battle was done, He was the victor, and even though Yoshihiro put up an impressive last stand, he too fell, and Naruto was now one step closer to fulfilling his ambition. Yoshihiro chuckled some more, coughing up even more blood as he was carried over the rooftops. A slow drizzle of rain begins to fall over the city. "Don't worry, uncle, we'll get you back to IWA soon," Tohisa spoke at his side comfortingly. Yoshihiro looked at his nephew and was about to chastise him over his stupidity when he saw the boy's eyes. Soft brown eyes that grew hard with determination as he rushed forward, spear held firmly in hand. He looked every bit the shinobi Yoshihiro had always wanted him to be. The old man smiled, nodding to himself before he let his head slump forward, darkness creeping over his vision as he allowed himself to close his eyes. He could rest now. Meanwhile in Kumo, Yujito sighed in contentment as she laid along the length of a tree branch, one arm hanging limply off the edge as she rested her head on the other. "You know, for someone who claims they're nothing like their tenant, you certainly don't make much of an effort to live up to that," came Akina's voice as she finished her warm-up exercises, walking over to the tree and standing under Yujito. The Nibi Jinchuriki scoffed. "Oh, shut up." Indeed, her likeness to her tenant was a sensitive subject to her. Her ears were pointed, and her green eyes held a strange edge or glint to them which could seem very similar to that of a cat, as well as her larger-than-normal fangs. These distinguishing features, which to many men would make her seem exotic and all the more beautiful, were often subjects of children's teasing when she was younger, and so were a very sensitive point for her. But still, resting above treetops and essentially cat-napping was one of the few indulgences she would admit most likely came from her feline tenant. Akina smirked, ready to tease her a bit more when a messenger suddenly ran up to them, breathing heavily. "Yujito-san, Akina-san. Raikage-sama requests your presence immediately." Yujito groaned, leaping off the tree and landing next to the other two as she looked to the messenger. "Did Sensei say what he wanted? Is it another scavenger hunt or training regiment?" Akina questioned as she bit back a groan. Zhuge Liang had a very interesting way of training them both physically and mentally. He would not allow them to eat, unless they completed the training. The scavenger hunts were a series of riddles, which were all made by Zhuge, and so were very, very complicated and difficult. Sometimes the two girls would have to go 3 days without food because of how difficult these riddles were. His training regiments, whenever he came up with them, never had them starving, but it made them beg for a scavenger hunt when he gave them. Obviously, either option was one the girls would be overly excited about. The messenger shook his head. "No, I don't think it dash." His statement was cut off as a 3-pointed scythe skewered him through and through, entering through his upper back and exiting through his chest, spraying blood in the two startled girls' faces as the scythe was savagely yanked out his side, cutting the man nearly in two from the chest up. The two girls snapped their attention over to the direction the scythe was pulled from, finding 2 men with black robes, red cloud designs engraved into them. "Fuck, I was hoping I'd be able to take out 2 of them with one swing." The one with white hair spoke loudly to himself. His partner said nothing as he looked at the 2 girls. Yujito and Akina's mouths suddenly felt dry as they each quickly identified their attackers. Akatsuki. Naruto arrived shortly at the slightly damaged Konoha encampment, ignoring the rain that began to fall over them, slowly growing in intensity. The wounded were being treated on portable bedspreads along the street, under some cloths that served to shield them from the cold rain, by whatever medics they had, the recruits still fit to fight standing guard, all parted to make way for him as he entered. Many of the younger recruits stared at him in awe as he passed, mutters passing over the crowd, their voices drifting through the air and into his ears, unbidden by the distance. "It's him. What power! He just forced IWA to retreat over the wall on his own. They say he's the Jinchuriki for the Kyubi no Kitsune. I don't care what he is, with that kind of power it's no wonder Kiri, Taki, Kusa and Aim are under him. They say he's the strongest ninja since the Yondaime Hokage. They say he can't be killed. I don't doubt it. I mean, did you see the dash?" Naruto ignored the foolish muttering of the green chunins, coming to a stop in front of Hinata, whose injuries were being treated by a medic, who was now staring upon him, frozen. Shino stood at her side uninjured. Hinata looked back up to him, her blank pale eyes serious as she nodded once in greeting. "Naruto-sama, thank you for saving me earlier." "Your thanks are not necessary." He spoke calmly, the the deepening effect of the face mask making his voice once again seem all the more hollow, sending chills down Hinata's spine. It had been so long since that cold, flat voice was heard in such a way, even Shino seemed to shift from one foot to the other in unease. Naruto turned his eyes to Shino, or at least seemingly did, since one couldn't really tell without his eyes being red. Aburame-san. Are you uninjured? Shino nodded. Yes, sir. From what my Kikachu have gathered, Mika-san and Tenten-san are also uninjured. Toshiro-san is taking care of a minor injury along his arm. Naruto nodded. Good. Take your men, and advance over the wall. Now that Yoshihiro is defeated, I want you to break their stranglehold. He paused for a brief moment. Then break their necks. Before he turned, making his way out of the camp. A few minutes later, several hundred yards outside of the camp, Naruto stopped, allowing his eyes to travel skyward, the dark gray clouds blocking out the sun, the black smoke from the flames rising to the heavens as cold rain fell from it. How strange! The Jinchuriki spoke to himself, pausing as he reflected on the situation. It rains, the very same day I returned to the battlefield. Just as it rained the eve of your death. He looked down to the blood-soaked gauntlet that covered his hand, as the rain slowly cleansed it from its crimson taint. Is that you? Weeping for me once again, Yoshino? He lowered his hand, reaching into his kunai pouch as he took out a butterfly pendant and redwood prayer beads, the gifts he had given them so long ago. Flames danced before his eyes as he blinked. The same words he spoke to himself, and to their spirits nearly a decade ago, returned to his mind, drifting through it like an echo in the wind. Flames consume only what can be touched. Your souls shall remain with me. Turning with his blood-red robe sweeping behind him, he placed the items back in his pouch as he made his way back to the camp. I alone shall shoulder the sorrow. That is all. The rain fell harder. Chapter 49. The Dragon Awakened. Yujito and Akina tensed as they stared upon the two Akatsuki members, the bloodied scythe held firmly in Haiden's grip as he wiped it clean, smirking as he spoke. Hey Kakuzu, looks like the Nibi ain't alone. Wanna have some fun with her once we've dealt with Nico? He questioned, licking his lips in a way that made bile rise in Akina's throat. She snarled, brandishing her three-piece staff as she prepared to fight the silver-haired immortal. Kakuzu grunted. We are here to do a job, kill the girl while I subdue the Nibi. That's all we need so I can get paid. Besides, unlike you, I actually have some morals. I will not, and neither will I allow you, to rape anyone, you disgusting pig. The silver-haired Yukinin growled. Whatever, moron. It looks like yours. You probably can't even pay for sex, so I don't know who you're trying to fool. Kakuzu snorted. Having heard hundreds of insults like that in his lifetime, it was too bothersome and tedious to make another cheap comeback. Don't even bother with those ridiculous rituals of yours, Haiden. Kill the girl and get it over with quick. I should be able to finish up the Nibi quickly as well. You overestimate yourself, Akatsuki. Yujito growled in anger at him. Her mind was wandering in another direction, however. If he's telling the other guy to kill Akina, then that means Akatsuki still knows nothing about her. I have to protect her, keep her away from them. They can't find out about the Kyuubi yet, and if she fights she may have to draw on its power. Akina, she spoke suddenly, catching the other girl's attention, even though she never removed her eyes from Haiden and Kakuzu. Go get Sensei. Bring him back to Hell Dash. I'm not about to leave you here alone to defend yourself against these two. She hissed back, tightening her grip on her three-piece staff as Haiden and Kakuzu began circling them. The older girl's eyes flashed a dangerous blackish purple as she glared at her fellow blonde. Go damn it, I can last here for 5 minutes. It'll take you and Sensei to get back. Akina hesitated for a moment, looking very conflicted about her current situation. She looked as if she was about to say no when she saw Yujito forming 3 distinct hand gestures. Enemy don't know. It confused the younger Jinchuriki for a brief moment, but she soon deduced their meaning, gritting her teeth even harder. They didn't know about the Kyuubi. And if she helped her friend, and had to call upon the Biju's power, and they escaped, then next time they would come with 4, maybe even 5 Akatsuki members. And the losses gathered from a conflict like that would weaken Kumo to a degree it could never hope to afford at this point in time. Still forming several quick hand seals, the girl threw her staff, spinning towards Haiden. The immortal smirked, raising his scythe as he prepared to cut the staff in half, only for the 3-pieced staff to shift in mid-air as it came down, flaring with lightning as it pierced his chest, pushing him back until he was quite literally pinned to a tree, the staff at an upwards angle, and so would be difficult to both remove and or step out of to simply have the blade come out of his back. The lightning in the blade shot straight through his entire body, causing his muscles to spasm and his whole body to jerk a few times as his scythe fell out of his hands and he slumped forward, seemingly dead. Akina and Yujito looked absolutely shocked. There was no way a simple javelin-style throw had killed an Akatsuki. Still, ignoring the strangeness, they did not look a gift horse in the mouth, Akina looking at Yujito again. There, that should make things easier. But judging by that guy, it should be pretty easy to beat his partner. Before she vanished in a cloud of smoke, rushing towards Kumo, full speed in order to find Yuga. Yujito watched her leave, sighing in relief before she turned back to Kakuzu, who watched her with apathy. Well, looks like it's just you and me. Wrong, was the bored drawl that escaped his lips before Akina's three-piece staff, still charged with a bit of her lightning chakra, was plunged through her shoulder, forcing a scream out of her throat before she jerked forward, pulling the staff out of her in the process as she stumbled. Turning back, she found Haiden, blood pouring down his chest from the previous wound as he laughed. Right now the party can get started, he said as he licked some of her blood, ignoring the black flames that gathered around the Jinchuriki of the Nibi as her eyes turned purple and her hackles rose. Kakuzu watched it all from the sidelines. He'd get paid either way, there was no need for him to get involved. Haiden could cut himself all he wanted. Hana, Sakura and Ino each made their way through the jagged, rocky peaks of the mountainside, their feet, legs, arms and palms scraped and bleeding freely as the sharp stones cut into their flesh, their lungs on fire as their limbs felt heavy. They had been running for nearly 3 hours now, the smoke rising from the burning city of Sakai still visible as they glanced behind them, the orange hue over the horizon bringing horror to them as they realized that it was not coming from the setting sun. Hana summoned wolves whining as the rocks did not spare them from the pain of having to hike over their sharp edges. The three females leapt down to a small outcropping. Finding a cave at its base, they made their way inside, the three quickly dismounting their summons and then moving on to helping remove the injured Kiba, Shikamaru and Chuji from the summoned beasts' backs, placing them as gently as they could along the side of the cave, where Sakura and Ino immediately began what medical treatment they could in their exhausted states. Hana looked over the 6 summoned wolves, bowing her head as tears stung the back of her eyes. Thank you for everything, all of you. The head of this particular group of summons nodded slowly, breathing heavily but managing to stay strong for his summoner, who was visibly distressed by the situation. We are yours to command, my lady, there is no need for thanks. Hana bit her lip rather nervously, looking away from her summon before she spoke. It is difficult, but I must ask one last thing of you. You speak of the wind user. The summon finished nodding slightly. I understand, we shall search for her and lead her back here when we find her. Thank you. Hana nodded, offering each of her summons a grateful hug before they each made their way out of the cave, leaving the humans to recuperate from their crushing defeat in more ways than one. Hana made her way to her brother's side, his pale features and erratic breathing, even as Sakura worked on him, making the already bleak light of her world diminish all the more. She stared as she wept bitter tears of pain and frustration, taking Kiba's head in her lap and cradling him close to her as her emotions poured from her. Her tears fell down onto her brother's placid face as Sakura managed to stabilize him before moving on to Shikamaru. She let her tears fall even as her mind wandered, giving way to the hopelessness of the situation they found themselves in. If even the Kage of IWA, who had fought to a dead draw with the legendary Hatake Kakashi and the second in command of the 7 swordsmen of Kiri Tatsuoki Guan, couldn't hold a candle to this man, even with their help, then what hope could they possibly have of ever besting him? She allowed herself to remember a poem. An old poem she read while scanning over a book in some of Suna's libraries. The Dark Lord rides in force tonight, and time will tell us all. Oh, throw down your plow and hoe, rest not to lock your homes. Side by side we wait for the might of the darkest of them all. Meanwhile in the Konoha camp, the men were currently making repairs on the city, bolstering its defenses in case IWA decided to attack again. Most of the injured moved to the local hospital, where the resident doctors worked on them as best they could, their faces filled with fear under the watchful eye of their recent conquerors. Naruto had quickly established his hold over the city, enforcing martial law and removing the standard government of the merchant city. Quickly sniffing out and removing any homes that provided refuge to IWA needs, capturing these wounded ninja and dragging them off to prison camps under armed surveillance. Toshiro, the Kiri ninja, and son of Guan was placed in charge of repair duty over the walls of the city, while Tenten and Li were placed over the guard duty of said walls. Mika was in charge of scouting and securing the far outer perimeters of the city. Hinata, meanwhile, injured as she was being assisted by the recently conscious Hataki Kakashi as well as Guan, in public security, relations and a newly established police force. Naruto, meanwhile, secure and confident over his hold over the city, marched, with a small contingent of bodyguards, as well as Shino onto IWA, ready to open negotiations to Iwa's surrender. Meanwhile, at IWA itself, Toshiro had taken up the mantle of leadership, bolstering Iwa's formidable mountain defenses, as he prepared the city to withstand the coming storm. The armies of IWA marshaled full force as they awaited the final, hardest hammerstroke from Konoha, their defiance and willingness to fight coming only from the desire to protect their homes, their families. Toshiro stood along the walls of IWA, carved from the mountains themselves, the nearly 12-foot thick and 70-foot tall stones, allowing him to look across the entire valley between their walls and the high, jagged mountains along the horizon that defended them from all foes. Until now, where the enemy marched upon their doorstep. The young man sighed, his worry over his uncle finally taking hold. He was in the hospital, the medic nuns working on him almost 24/7 trying to keep his condition stable. There was not just the wounds from the battle to worry about, but the stress from the travel, the injuries themselves, and the fact that his uncle had not taken his medication since he entered the battle had allowed his long-time standing tuberculosis to flare up again. It was difficult to treat his disease in this condition. The medication they used to treat his disease decreased proteins, and also thinned his blood. Two things that hampered the natural healing factors of the human body. Toshiro-sama! One of the IWA scouts ran up to him, breathing heavily. The young, newly instated IWA commander turned. Yes? He questioned warily, his heart dropping in worry as he envisioned Konoha to already be there. Sir, our scouts have reported sighting the Hokage with a small squad of Anbu making his way here. Sir, he carries a white flag. He calls for a negotiation. Toshiro paused, growling as the thought reached him. Negotiation? That bastard wants to demand our surrender. He snarled as he looked back at the scout. Go, tell the commanders to ready the soldiers. We will not cower at that tyrant's feet, we will honor the Kages of IWA and defend our homes to the last man. The scout bowed, a glint of determination entering his eyes at his new commander's words. Yes, sir, right away. Before he ran off. The young IWA commander sighed, he wondered what his uncle would tell him at a time like this. Even though he truly wanted to defend his people, he had seen the might of the Kage of Konoha, and he held little hope of victory. What should he do? What would his uncle do? He thought on that question for a long time, the answer finally coming to him as he remembered when he questioned his uncle a few weeks ago when he made his way out of IWA to defend Sakai. He had caught up to him at the gates, asking him to allow him to go with him. Yoshihiro had again said no, only for his nephew to question why. Because he sighed. If something happens to me, it will be up to you to lead our people. The older man paused, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. You always remember, many times you have to make tough decisions, decisions that some men will agree with, and others will not. But you always do what you think is best. What will protect the people and what will help them, always them. The man had then put his helmet on, turning to his men and giving them the order before the army marched, leaving their home in order to fight for it. Tohisa stared up to the starry sky. Okay then, like you say, uncle. I will do what I think is best. He nodded to himself before he made his way down the stairs, ready to oversee preparations of his men. Zhuge Liang made his way through the halls. He could feel Yujito's chakra of the Nibi flaring up. Now, normally because Yujito and Akina constantly trained together. And so, they trained often using their demon chakra. But at this point Yujito was pulling out more of the Nibi's chakra than he had ever felt before, and strangely enough, he had felt nothing of Akina pulling out the Kyubi. He was beginning to get worried. Could it possibly be that Yujito had lost control and possibly killed Akina? He thought he trained her better than that, and he had faith, but still accidents did happen. The only other thing it could be was some kind of new tra. Sensei! Sensei! He heard Akina's voice, turning around as he found her running towards him, her face set into a slight panic as she rushed up to him. Akina! He said, visibly surprised. Sensei! She gasped as she came to a full halt. Akatsuki! 2 of them. Shuga's expression turned visibly grim. Why now of all times? Then his mind came to another thought. Did they mention anything about knowing you hold the Kyubi? He questioned quickly, a slight fear coiling around his chest at the thought that Kumo would have the eyes of the Akatsuki fixed solely upon it. They could not afford to enter a war with Akatsuki while Uzumaki would no doubt be setting his sights over them very soon. Still, his worries were abated as Akina shook her head. No, that's why I left. Yujito didn't want me to use the demon's chakra, she answered, turning back around ready to leave. Come on, we have to hurry back and help her. She moved to leave when Juga caught her wrist. Looking back to him, she yelled in outrage. What are you doing, sensei? We need to go now. Within the rakege's hand his white feathered fan appeared, gripped tightly as he held it in that familiar way that Akina knew was nothing good. Sorry, Akina, but you will not be joining this fight. He threw the arm he was gripping upwards, before he swiftly used his, now free, hand to strike 8 distinct points, the chakra gates of the human body. Akina felt her whole body grow heavy and she fell to her knees, breathing harshly as an invisible weight held her down. What? She gasped out as she struggled to stand back up. What the hell are you doing? Zhuge Liang nodded, admiring his work as he spoke. You are within one of my more powerful genjutsu. It makes you feel as if the gravity around you is nearly 7 times higher than normal. The human body can only withstand 3 times normal gravity. But because this is merely an illusion, you will receive no physical damage. I will deal with this. Kumo cannot afford an enemy such as Akatsuki discovering you here. I shall remove this illusion once I am done with this threat. His words spoken, he turned, walking down the hallway as he made his way to save his second student. The feel of Kyubi's chakra licking at his back stayed with him as he left. She would break out of his illusion soon enough, he just hoped he would be finished by then. Toshiro and Mika stood along Guan's bedside. The older man's injuries had not fully healed, but he was well enough to attend some minor administrative duties. So, Naruto-san has left for IWA then? The large, bearded man questioned the other two, who nodded in response. Mika, who was leaning along the doorframe, spoke up. Yes, so far everything has been quiet, but we do need to keep a tight surveillance over the area. There might still be some Iwan masquerading as civilians, ready to sabotage our defenses if IWA ever manages to launch a counter-attack against us. They will not with Naruto-sama present here. He spoke firmly, a thought occurring to him as he looked to his adopted son. Toshiro, he called, catching his attention. Tell me, what do you make of Naruto-sama? The young man visibly hesitated before he spoke, remembering that image of the man, standing in full blood-red robe as flames and blood danced around him in a horrifying display, the hissing of snakes and the glow of his piercing red eyes. I don't really know what to make of him. He spoke slowly, worried his father might disapprove of his hesitancy. But the older man's voice reached his ears after a moment, a knowing timbre in his voice as he hummed. Not alone in that, my boy, not alone at all. But he is the only one that can possibly bring order to this chaotic world. Toshiro and Mika nodded, though Kunoichi's thoughts were quite different, her red eyes gleaming as the thought passed through her mind. And that is why I must destroy him. Naruto allowed his eyes to travel over the assembled army of IWA Nins. He could safely assume they numbered around 300 to 400, much larger than his rather modest group of 35. The high walls of the city itself behind them, a constant reminder of what they were ready to throw down their lives to defend. He felt quite confident in his ability to escape should the need arise. But he highly doubted IWA had the nerve to strike out at him, not after the display he put up in Sakai. He knew that there was always the possibility. He was not arrogant enough to dismiss that entirely. But fear would hold them back, make them hesitate, and if they truly did decide to attack him, their intent would long be revealed, and he would be prepared to make his escape. A small tent, no doubt where their commander sat, stood between him and the imposing army. Naruto-sama, I do not like this. It could easily be a trap, and if IWA tries something, it will not be easy to defend you, sir. Shino drawled in his usual calm, stoic tone. Naruto nodded. Noted. His deep, empty voice reached Shino's ears. Despite his response, however, the blonde ninja, regardless of whatever danger, began making his way to the tent, throwing a quick, "Wait here," over his shoulder, as he never paused in his stride. He entered the tent moments later, finding the spear-wielding IWA Nin that had saved the Tsuchikage from his death back at Sakai. Flanked by 4 Anbu, as well as 4 standing behind the blonde. He let his eyes lazily travel from one to the other, finally settling on what he assumed was their commander. Tohisa glared right back, staring with all the bravery he could muster into the fiery red eyes that burned into the memories of all those they came across. He took a deep breath before he stood. Haiden breathed heavily as he removed the blade from his chest, purple, black flames dissipating as Yujito's bleeding, unconscious form lay before them unmoving, as crimson pooled beneath her. The platinum blonde locks matted down to her head, back and shoulders as green eyes stared unseeing to the world before them, her breathing heavy, erratic and shuddering as her form shook from the cold that crept over her, gripping her down to the marrow. Kakuzu grunted as he walked next to the girl, using his foot to roll her over. "Took you long enough, you're pathetic." "Shut up," Haiden growled, falling to his knees as he began praying to Jashin, raising the 5-hearted Akatsuki member's annoyance. "You fool, we don't have time for this, soon people will come to investigate." "Let the fuckers come," Haiden snarled. "I don't give 2 shits." Kakuzu rolled his eyes. "Whatever, stay here if you want, I'm taking the girl." As he reached down to grab her, however, she suddenly burst in a cloud of black, coal-like smoke, right in Kakuzu's eyes. He reeled back, and in the same motion the back of his head was impaled by a kunai. Haiden stood up as his partner fell, but soon found that he could not move as cold, decaying arms rose up from the ground, gripping his legs as they forced him to fall. He looked momentarily disturbed until he realized what this was. Placing his hands together, he spoke. "Kai." He looked around as the illusion dissipated, revealing Kakuzu still on the floor with a kunai in his head, now in the process of removing it, and a white-clad form cradling Yujito close to his chest as he stood off to the side. "Sunsen." They heard her wavering voice as she struggled to speak to the new arrival. "Sure," he quieted her as he placed her down. "Rest for now, you did very well. I'm proud of you." She finally allowed the darkness to claim her, visible by her body going limp in his arms. He formed a quick mud clone, who took the girl and ran as he turned around. "Who the fuck are you?" Haiden snarled, angry that this one had taken their target. "Silence, Haiden," Kakuzu growled, finally removing the kunai from his head, a shadowy mass leaving his body as it seemingly melted out of him. "Su," he drew. "You are the Yandame Reikage of Kumo's sleeping dragon of the moon, Zhuge Ma Song Liang." "So you know of me," the Reikage said. "Kakuzu of Taki and Haiden of Yuki, the immortals of the Akatsuki, correct?" he asked as he used his feathered fan to well fan himself. "That's right, you fucking faggot," Haiden growled, hefting his scythe back onto his shoulder as he prepared to swing. "I see," Liang drawled as he lowered his fan slightly. "Well, allow me to put that name to the test." Chapter 50, Iwa's Surrender. Zhuge Liang, arguably the most intelligent man in the land, knew that he was standing before one of the greatest challenges he would ever face. While he held great confidence in his abilities, he knew that this would be one fight where a single mistake would cost him the whole thing. Luckily, unlike their previous opponents, he knew who and what these men were, and what they were capable of. It was difficult, extremely so, and he had lost many spies and assassins in his quest to understand them and many of the other Akatsuki members, from those who did not keep secrets, like Uchiha Itachi, and to those who guarded them like the greatest treasures, such as Sasori. Only the leader remained a mystery to him, no known village, no previous affiliations, nothing. "Heh, so this is the supposed sleeping dragon then?" Haiden sneered at the man, placing his scythe over his shoulder. Zhuge Liang allowed his eyes to take in the circle at the man's feet, and the blood cascading down injuries upon his form, places where Yujito as well had her injuries. So it appeared the reports from his spies were true. He would have to keep an eye on that scythe. "Yes, be careful, Haiden, he will be much stronger than even the Nibi Jinchuriki," Kakuzu warned as he eyed the man. Haiden scoffed. "Whatever," he growled before he swung his scythe, the 3-pointed weapon flashing once as it sailed towards the Reikage. Liang's eyes narrowed as he swung his fan. "Dai Kamikachi," he spoke in his usual calm voice before he released hundreds of wind blades upon the Akatsuki members. "Doton Doria Heki." Kakuzu placed his hands on the ground, erecting a large wall of mud and stone between themselves and the wind blades. Watching in apathy as it was torn to shreds, but nonetheless completing the task of stopping the blades in their tracks. As the dust settled and he looked upon Liang's white-clad form and sharp, piercing eyes like that of a hawk, he knew that they would be in for a tough fight, one that they would have to win quickly, before any more trouble arrived. Blood-red eyes burned through all they laid upon, fearsome crimson billowing over his single, powerful, oppressing form as he stood before an army, each fearful yet brave as they charged headlong into his and blades let loose as they attempted to fell him, the great power that he was. Blood fell like rain as fire consumed his second blade, making those terrible eyes glow all the more as more men fell to him, flames escaping the boundaries of his sword, burning the flesh off the IWA ninja's very bones, spreading all around them, basking him in their orange glow. Throughout all this she watched, held to the terrible scene by horrified rapture, the screams of the dead and dying reaching her ears, dimly piercing her haze-filled mind as she watched him approach her, his clawed hand releasing one of his blades as it gripped her throat. She tried to scream, her fear escalating as she stared into the fiery pits of his eyes. But no sound escaped her lips, no great cry for help, of defiance, or even fear able to escape her, as she struggled fruitlessly to escape his hold. As the demon reared back his blade, she could finally hear herself scream. As her eyes snapped open, Temari reached for the first thing within reach, grasping desperately as she tried to pry herself from the grip of darkness that clawed at her consciousness, feeling a firm hand press against her chest as she screamed, and another grip her own as she thrashed, her screams faintly reaching her own ears as a familiar voice called her name. Her breathing was erratic, she was trying to calm herself, trying to remember her training as she felt coppery liquid rise up in her throat and spill out from the side of her lips, hacking, strangled coughs rising from her throat as a cold chill ran up and down her spine, a shudder making her teeth rattle as her eyes shut tightly. "Temri, you have to slow your breathing," the voice, echoing as it reached her ears. "No! She's having a panic attack. Damn it!" Temari faintly noticed a soft green glow pass over her eyes as the hand pressing down on her chest and darkness began to grip the edge of her senses, its hold growing stronger and stronger. As she tried to shake her head, she didn't want to go back, she didn't want to see those eyes again, those blood-red eyes. Lightning fell from the heavens around them as Haiden and Kakuzu tried with varying success at dodging. "God damn it, where is he?" Haiden yelled in anger. Already his left arm had been struck by one of the lightning bolts, a deep jagged burn going all the way down to the bone, showing where the lightning had cut. He had been unable to drink any of Suga's blood yet, and so was forced to dodge the attacks lest he be made useless since you couldn't necessarily kill him. "Silence, Haiden!" Kakuzu snarled before a massive lightning bolt struck between them, its roar drowning out all other sounds for a moment, as his ears started ringing, kicking up a great deal of dust as the ancient shinobi had to shield his eyes lest the dust get into them. A shadow suddenly loomed over him, spinning around, and he caught sight of Suga's white robes. As he began to fall towards him, passing his hand over his fan, Kakuzu saw as it transformed into a single Chinese straight sword. Bringing out two kunai, he blocked the blade. Releasing several tendrils from his back, he lashed out with them at the rakeage, only to have the ninja leap back, vanishing a moment later into the dust that surrounded them from the lightning bolts that he realized had just ceased. The dust, however, did not settle. He saw various shadows shift all around him as his extra four hearts, in their massed forms, gathered around him as he prepared to unleash his assault with all the combined elemental affinities in his arsenal whenever he caught sight of him. He heard the sound of clashing blades and snapped his head in its general direction. "Haiden, move!" he yelled as he charged up some wind and fire-based chakra before he released them. In truth, he didn't care whether Haiden moved or not. The man had an amazing healing capacity. He'd seen him get burned before, and while taking time to heal like a normal human, he always did heal with no scarring to speak of. So if Haiden moved or not, it was really no matter what. The dust scattered in wake of his wind-empowered flames, revealing Zhuge Liang for a split second as the man leapt up, above the flames, his clothes barely singed. Kakuzu acted quickly, forming wind, lightning and fire before he unleashed them in a massively wide-ranged attack, making sure that this time he wouldn't miss. The dust parted again, revealing the rakeage, his face slightly panicked as he formed hand seals before flame and lightning crashed over him. There was a cry followed by another deafening roar before his attack was forcefully dispersed, a shield of bright yellow lightning crackling around the rakeage, his blade held firmly in hand. Kakuzu snarled, but a blade of lightning suddenly piercing his chest had him coughing a bit of blood. Looking behind him, he found Liang standing there, the blade held firmly in his grip as he glared at him with those cold eyes. "One." "Wrong," Kakuzu said as he melted into mud. Liang, who was still hovering above the ground, held by the static electricity of his shield, heard a crash behind him, snapping his head around, and he found several large earth dragons moving towards him. Disabling his shield, he turned and released several more wind blades which cut the dragons to pieces. When he landed, he was forced to block another strike from Haiden's three-pointed sickle spear, grunting in exertion as he staggered back. Kakuzu watched as his breathing was a little heavier than before, the sweat dabbing his forehead as he held his stance. Haiden stepped slightly in front of him, sneering at the man as he placed his sickle back on his shoulder. "Is this all the great sleeping dragon has to offer? You really are a wimp, Kakuzu. That bitch was a lot tougher than this. At this rate it'll be over before their umbu are even halfway here." Kakuzu's eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. While those lightning techniques were powerful, a man of Liang's reputation shouldn't be this easy to tire out. Something was wrong, he could feel it in his bones, something was prickling at the edge of his senses, warning bells going off from his years of experience. But as Liang formed more hand seals, the clouds overhead gathering once again with thunder and lightning rumbling over them, he gave it little more thought as he prepared himself for whatever the Reikage had to throw at them. Naruto's eyes stared with apathy towards the sitting IWA commander, taking in the young man's veiled nervousness, and the tension visible in his umbu guards before he spoke. "Where is the one known as Yoshihiro Shimizu?" Though he knew the answer already, it would be good to make sure of the older man's fate. Tohisa's eyes narrowed in fury, but he hid his distaste well as he spoke. "Our Tsuchikage is soon to be recovered from his injuries at Sakai. I am in charge until he does." It was a bold-faced lie, and they both knew it, especially Naruto. No man, no matter how powerful, could recover from the injuries he inflicted that quickly, unless of course they were a Jinchuriki. Yoshihiro, however, was not. "We both know that is not true," he drawled, causing the newly appointed IWA commander to bristle at the emotionless man that spoke of how badly he had harmed his uncle as if he was discussing some child's mischievousness. "If you have come here to demand Iwa surrender to you, then my answer to you is to leave now. IWA will not surrender." Naruto stared at the young man in his late 20s, standing before him with a glare of defiance before he looked around the tent, a void-like air surrounding him, making him seem like some strange, inhuman creature that had sprouted from the darkest of shadows merely to taunt and torment them. "If you do not surrender your city, then it shall burn to the ground." Tohisa knew that it wasn't a threat, it was a promise, and from his actions at Sakai, it was a promise he knew he could keep, but he would not be intimidated, he would not surrender his city without some semblance of a struggle. IWA was not so helpless. "If you attack the city, if you bring your armies here, you may succeed in destroying us. But I swear to you, for every IWA ninja that is lost, 10 of yours will fall before him. And before you are able to take this city, so much blood will fill these streets that it will sicken even you. I swear upon the gods that taking this city by force will be the end of you and your reign upon our lands. For Kumo and Suna will not hesitate to destroy you as they did all those years ago." Naruto tilted his head slightly. "You truly believe that, at this point, the other two countries can feel me?" Tohisa shook his head, a smirk finding its way to his lips. "You are powerful, but with your power has come the attention of many who wish you to fail. Eyes that will gladly slit your throat when your army is bleeding itself white within my city." There was a silence then, one which many in the room found very uncomfortable as they watched the two leaders stare each other down. Tohisa knew that the truth of the matter was that if IWA faced this man in the field and within their city, they would most likely be slaughtered, and the city taken within a day, 2 at the most. What he was trying to do was make his fighting spirit, and the spirit of that of his men, seem strong enough that the Kage would be more lenient in the terms of their surrender, and that they would be able to get something out of it. His uncle had always said to do what's best for the people. If they were treated fairly and with the respect they deserved from Konoha, then what did it matter what name they served under? To fight and die a useless death was not something he would subject his people to. Naruto tilted his head. "It is in your best interest to listen to the terms." "Then offer them," he snarled. "I'll make my own demands afterwards." Naruto smirked at the boy. Despite all his bravado, was intelligent enough to recognize surrender as his best option. He reached slowly into his cloak, revealing a scroll and unrolling it on the table before he spoke. "IWA will be treated the same as Kiri. Your leaders may be of your choosing, however, these leaders must report to overseers of my choosing every month on all actions, economical, military, or otherwise. If these reports do not arrive within 2 months at the most, an investigation shall take place. If any of your men are found guilty of harming the overseer in any way, then they will be executed. If the leader of this village is involved, and discovered to be so, then he too shall be executed. You must provide military relief whenever called upon. A strict state of martial law shall be enforced for a period of 6 months. Your civilian and ninja shall each hold the same rights and privileges of every Konoha, Kiri, Ain, Kusa, Oto, and Taki civilian, including free travel between the aforementioned nations. Free trade is encouraged as well. Every one of your ninja must be registered in the archives, with a monthly update on their skills, rank, and classing. There will be a strong Konoha military presence within IWA for a period of 6 months. And finally, anyone convicted of treason, attempts at treason, or abridgment of such shall be executed in a public display within IWA itself. These are my demands. Tohisa thought for a long moment before he spoke. Very well, but all trials of IWA needs must be held in IWA. Your military presence is not allowed to harm our civilians. And should IWA ever be attacked by another nation and we request assistance, you are to send it as well. And finally, my uncle suffers from a very bad lung disease, the beginnings of tuberculosis, which he developed approximately 5 years ago. In exchange for our surrender, you are to provide rare herbs from Kiri, which are able to cure this disease. You forget, IWA is now my territory. If they attack you, they are attacking me. I shall send forces if I perceive the threat to be great enough. He looked down to the scroll and gestured to it with his metal-covered hand. If that is all, sign the scroll with your blood. Tohisa nodded and bit his thumb enough to draw blood, and so slowly wrote his name onto the parchment, next to Naruto's, who had already been placed there. Before his thumb left the scroll, however, the parchment glowed a bright red, and Tohisa pulled his hand back as fast as he could, only to gasp as a painful, burning sensation rose up his arm, eliciting a scream of pain from the man as he fell onto his knees. The Umbu each drew their blades, pointing at him as they were ready to fight him for his treachery. The glow of the scroll fading, Naruto rolled it back up swiftly and placed it back in his cloak. What have you done? One of the Umbu snarled at him. This is a blood scroll, a scroll embroiled with hundreds of seals formed within the parchment itself. It is my own creation. If you, willingly and knowingly, break any of the agreements on this parchment, then you shall die. You bastard! Another of the Umbu snarled, watching the seals snake up Tohisa's arm and settle over his chest as they burned into his skin. You did not seriously expect me to simply take your word at face value, young Shimizu? Words are meaningless in the world of shinobi, as are treaties. This one, however, I know you shall follow, as will your uncle. Placing the scroll back in his pocket, he turned his back to the ninja as he began making his way out of the tent. Why yo dash! Stop! Tohisa yelled to his Umbu as the pain momentarily increased in his chest as the thought of allowing the man to follow through with his attack passed his mind. Naruto cast a glance over his shoulder. You can expect the herbs you have requested to arrive in a week's time. Inform your uncle and your people. IWA is now mine. With that said, he walked out of the tent, the hateful glares at his back. He glanced at the cloudy sky before he spoke. One step closer, then. Glancing at his hand, he seemed contemplative for a moment before he spoke. The new world approaches. An explosion tore through the landscape of Kumo, soon revealing Zhuge as he leapt out of the flames, his clothes and hair singed before he released another volley of wind blades into the flames, which rose even higher for a moment before Haiden rushed after him, his scythe in hand, his skin visible with burns but quite uncaring to them as he snarled, his eyes alight with fury as he swung, trying to kill the Raikage for what felt like the 100th time. Only for the man to block the strike once again with his blade, his palm charging with lightning chakra which formed a long spike which he used to try and impale him, only for the silver-haired immortal to swerve out of the way before he backhanded the Raikage across the face, causing him to stagger back as he spit out blood, taking his stance again as he glared at the silver-haired man. A crash behind him had him breaking his stance as he spun around, only to find nothing. He tried to spin back around as he realized he had been tricked, only for Haiden's steel stabbing rod to plunge through his back and out his chest, coughing up blood. The Raikage didn't have much time to feel pain before his head was torn cleanly from his shoulders, his body falling to the floor in an unmoving heap. Kakuzu, his tendrils receding back into his form, spoke. So you got him then? Haiden's answer was a snarl as he spit on the Raikage's dead form. Yeah, I did. Damn bastard was a stubborn one. Kakuzu nodded, But before any more words were exchanged, Haiden spun around and with another quick jab of his spike rod plunged it into the ancient ninja's chest. Kakuzu's eyes widened before he batted the rod away and leapt back. "What the hell do you dash?" he began but stopped as Haiden's form began to fade and become hazy before it vanished, revealing Liang, a wind blade extending from his palm, Haiden's headless body now in place of where Liang once was. His curses now fluidly reach his ears from his severed head. "Genjutsu," he growled out. "It was genjutsu this whole time. When did you cast it?" he questioned angrily. "During my first Kamachichi, when you erected that rock barrier to protect yourselves." "You little shit stain, I'm gonna fucking kill you! You hear me? Fucking kill you! You are dead! Da-. Haiden's cries of anger were stopped as a ball of condensed lightning chakra was tossed at his head, exploding a moment later in a gruesome display of blood and brain matter. The immortal could enjoy the rest of eternity in pieces. The Raikage then turned his attention back to Kakuzu, his raven black hair whipping in the gust of wind that came through the field. The power of suggestion, the power of deception. The greatest weapon of the ninja. You two have no one but yourselves to blame for this defeat. So few male ninjas focus on the art of genjutsu. You automatically assumed I was a close-range Rai ninjutsu specialist. He glanced slightly behind Kakuzu. And now you have sealed your fate. Releasing the second genjutsu he placed over the man, Kakuzu's senses were suddenly assaulted by rage, bloodlust, and killing intent, and before he could do much of anything, a clawed hand tore his back, wide open, blood spraying forth as he staggered, glancing behind him. His eyes widened in shock and fear as he came across the sight of a young girl, with shoulder-length blonde hair, standing over him. 3 tails of malicious red chakra whipping behind her, as Tsunade of the, and another woman. He recognized from the bingo books as Yuang, Zhuge Liang's wife, stepped through the tree line. "Kakuzu of Taki, for your crimes against Kumo, I the Yandame Raikage, hereby sentence you to death." The man spoke as his feathered fan was still held firmly in his grip. "May the gods have mercy on your soul." Chapter 51, A New Dawn. Suna Hospital, 3 days after Iwa's surrender. Temari groaned, opening her silvery eyes slowly as she took in the white ceiling that hung above her. Wincing as the bright lights made themselves known to her sleep-filled irises, eliciting a second groan as she threw her arm over her eyes. "Oh, tell God to turn the lights down." "Heh, sorry sis, you're not dead just yet," came her response to her left. She turned her head, finding her little brother, Kankuro, sitting on the chair next to her bed. He stood, grabbing the pitcher and glass that rested on the table next to him before he poured it. He gently placed his hand behind her head, cradling it slightly upwards so she could drink properly. She gave him a grateful smile, still too weak to move as he put the cup to her lips and waited for her gesture to stop. Placing the cup back onto the table, he sat back on the chair. "So, how you feeling?" Temari smirked. "Like the morning after Jounin promotions," she answered truthfully, making Kankuro choke back a snort of amusement. But soon her gaze turned to worry as she looked around the room. "Where are the others? How did I get here?" Kankuro sighed at this. He knew it was coming, but the news was not good. "They are all in other rooms nearby. Each suffering from some mild exhaustion, dehydration among other things," he finished, trailing off uneasily as he shifted his gaze away from her. Temari knew she wasn't going to enjoy hearing what he had to say. But nevertheless, she needed to hear it. "Kankuro," she said, her silent order quite clear. But still, he wouldn't look at her, his nervous, uncertain shifting from foot to foot, increasing the wind mistress's nervousness until she finally spoke again, her tone hard and demanding. "Don't make me pull rank, little brother?" He sighed as he slumped forward, his shoulders dropping ever so slightly as he began to rub his head. "Sakura, Ino, and Hana are the best out of all of you. Like I said, just some mild exhaustion and dehydration. You're pretty well off yourself. Apart from a few torn muscles, 3 bruised ribs, some blood loss, and a twisted ankle, you're perfectly fine." Chuji, another sigh. "Chuji's stable, but one of the blades that cut him damaged a nerve along his arm. We weren't able to do much over the scars either, having been formed by some kind of mixture of wind and fire chakra. The nerve damage is also irreparable. He'll have to retrain that arm to mold chakra properly all over again with that handicap. Shikamaru too has suffered some very serious nerve damage along most of his extremities. Unlike Chuji's though, his can be treated, and eventually fixed with a few months of intense physical therapy." And Kiba? She questioned as he paused. He took another deep breath, his eyes taking on a look of sadness as he turned them onto her. Kiba's been forced into a chemical coma for now, he answered grimly. What? She questioned, her eyes wide in disbelief as she struggled to sit up, her breathing becoming ragged with the effort, before Kankuro stood up and held her down onto the bed. Why Kiba dash? Kiba has suffered a complete nervous and mental breakdown. Kankuro interrupted her shocked ramblings, silencing her with the grim tone of his voice. The loss of his arm, by circumstance his ninja career and position as clan heir, and finally Akamaru's death has hit him very hard. We've forced him into a chemical-induced coma to keep him from hurting himself, as well as any around him. Sakura and a few other medics are attending him physically, and Ino has been trying to restore his psyche through use of various Yamanaka techniques and scrolls. It'll take a while, but there is hope that he will recover. He spoke flatly, knowing that it was a bold-faced lie. There was little hope that Kiba would recover from this, only with someone with extensive medical knowledge, like the legendary Tsunade, who was said to have been able to heal some victims of mental trauma did they have a hope of doing such a thing. But no one had seen or even heard of Tsunade for nearly a decade. So finding her wasn't really an option. Still his lie worked, seeing as Temari's worries were abated somewhat by the look on her face as she sighed in mild relief. That's good, where's Gaara? Kankuro paused at that, chuckling to himself after a moment. Gaara's been at your side since you guys got here. It was about an hour ago that I managed to convince him to head home and get some rest. The puppet user chuckled. You should have seen him, just standing here, looming over you. Kinda creepy, really. Temari smiled at her brother's story. To know that Gaara was worried made her feel good. Thanks, still I'm gonna go to sleep now, okay? She muttered, her eyes beginning to droop as the medication took its full effect. Yeah, sure, sweet dreams, sis, Kankuro said as he stood up, running his hand once through her hair before he hefted Kurasa back onto his shoulder, making sure not to put too much pressure on his recently operated spine. He strode out the room, moving to tell Gaara Temari had woken up, as per the redhead's request. Meanwhile, Gaara sat in his living room. Before him was a table with the map of the continent, in one hand his kage hat, in the other a saucer with sake in it. While he wasn't one to drink, even he needed one with the current situation. Iwa had fallen, one more territory under the Devil King's possession. One more village fell before his might. Now only 2 of the former 5 great shinobi villages remained along with several, smaller, independent factions, such as Yuki in the north. But still the time for contemplation, and the time for debating was over. It was time, right now, to decide the fate of Suna. Walking to the nearby window, he attached a message to the messenger bird, and released it. It would head to Baki, who would gather the military heads of the village for one last meeting to finally decide just where or how Suna would stand in face of this threat. He could only hope they were not too late. Hospital, 5 days since Iwa's surrender. Juga Liang and his wife Yuing stared through the glass at Yujito. Tsunade and Shizen were currently treating her. He had sent Akina back to her home, after having to calm her down from her worrying, as well as her anger at the genjutsu he had pulled over her. Still, nevertheless, this interference from Akatsuki was a major deterrent to his plan to attack Konoha while the Uzumaki was away. She was not healing as quickly as she should, and it was quickly deduced that it was due to the sheer nature of Haiden's. It is entirely possible that he not only injured Yujito, but the Nibi as well, and so the demon was struggling to keep them both alive. A most unfortunate turn of events. Yuing glanced at her husband from the corner of her eyes before she looked back at Yujito. What will you do now? When have you ever known me, my dear, to rely solely on one single strategy? He answered blandly. It is true that without Yujito, launching an attack on Konoha would be too large of a gamble for my liking. But I have another strategy prepared just in case one, or more of us were incapacitated, and another in case that fails. Yuang shook her head, allowing a smirk to grace her features. It never ceased to amaze her how her husband could meticulously plan such things and prepare for such outcomes. She stared at him for a long while, quickly growing impatient with his silence. Well, my dear husband, do you mind sharing? Liang hid a smirk. He enjoyed getting a rise from his wife it tended to prove entertaining later. You will know soon enough, he responded, smirking as he received his expected answer. A snort of frustration and mild anger. Still, all joking aside, he turned to his wife. Weighing. She questioned with a sideways glance. He paused, measuring his words before he spoke. The truth is that very soon, there is a great, and very real possibility, that Uzumaki Naruto shall march upon our city. If when he does, the defenses have to hold. Yuang smirked a little, though it held great uncertainty at her husband's unease, something that was rarely evident in the man. Husband, no one in over 300 years has ever been able to enter the city, much less the great keep and temple that stands at the top of the mountains. What has you dash? Wang. Liang interrupted gently. The defenses have to hold out. Kumo itself must hold out. She looked up at him uncertainly, but soon nodded. Liang closed his eyes, nodding back. This was a rather precarious position he found himself in. It would have to be handled very carefully. He looked to Ewing once more, who had returned her eyes to Yujito. Inform me when she wakes up. I must attend to something. That said, the man turned and proceeded down the hallway, ready to set his second plan into motion. Meanwhile, Akina, who was currently training out in one of the simpler training grounds, her thoughts troubled as she went through the motions with her weapon. Ever since she had arrived here, with Tsunade and Shizen, Yujito had quickly become something akin to a sister. Seeing her laying there, so injured, so vulnerable, so weak, it was a hard thing. She continued to play the battle over and over in her head, wondering if, had she decided to stay instead of do what Yujito asked, would they have managed to beat the Akatsuki anyway, with Yujito not having to suffer such? Then there was the situation building in Konoha. News of Iwa's surrender had reached many ears by now, and the entire village felt this oppressive feeling in the air, like the storm brewing over the horizon. Her own feelings of anticipation, anger, uncertainty, and fear grew all the more as she dared to look forward to the coming conflict. At the chance to finally put all her years of training, all her years of preparation, of studying, all the years put into reaching this one goal, this one purpose, it would finally be time to put all these years to their test. As she stopped her light training, she looked westward, the high mountain peaks that guarded Iwa's borders visible even from this great distance. A storm brewing ever so slowly behind them. Hospital room, Iwagakure, 1 week since the surrender of their city. So this is the seal he placed on you? The tired voice of Yoshihiro reached Tohisa's ears as the old man was examining the seal etched onto his nephew's chest. While many of the doctors had protested, he had demanded to see his nephew the moment he woke up, and what Yoshihiro wants, Yoshihiro gets. So here he was, in one of the hospital's spare rooms, examining the seal that would assure Iwa's cooperation. I'm sorry, uncle, Tohisa said as the silence dragged on, lowering his eyes. It always happened, every time his uncle would have to pull him out of the fire. He felt so inadequate sometimes as he tried to live up to his uncle's expectations and the village's expectations, only to fall short every time. Do not apologize, Yoshihiro sighed gently. The Uzumaki boy said that he created this seal, and I don't doubt it. If it was me in your place, I would probably be the one with the seal, not you. There was another silence between them, before it was finally broken by Tohisa again. Did I make the right choice, uncle? In surrendering? His voice carried a definite edge of uncertainty, like a child confessing to his parents he stole some candy from the store. Yoshihiro looked at his nephew's downcast eyes and regretful expression before he sighed and placed a hand on his shoulder. Tohisa, look at me. The young man did so. When you decided to surrender the city, was your primary concern that of the village? He nodded and Yoshihiro smiled. Then yes, Tohisa, you made the right choice. He spoke before standing. That seal, I believe, will do exactly what he says it will do. I'm no expert, but I recognize some of the characters. None of them indicate this can be remotely activated. Only through the different synapses of your brainwaves I believe its effect will take place. The older man wiped his hands before he spoke again. Well, there's nothing more we can do for now, kid. Head on home, give a kiss to your wife and kid. God knows they're probably worried after all the commotion and rumors floating around. Tohisa nodded before he stood and walked to the other end of the room, where his shirt and other equipment lay around the table. Placing them all back into their proper place, he began making his way out the door. He gave his uncle one last hug. Thank you for everything, uncle. Don't mention it, Yoshihiro said simply, watching as the younger man left. His thoughts traveled to their current accord with Konoha. While he wasn't happy with the deception, he understood it, and was willing to work the rest of his days to pay off his nephew's imprisonment. He held no delusions of the Uzumaki boys' deceptive and underhanded tactics, as the people were calling it. Those two things practically defined the ninja world. And he would have done the same thing if the shoe was on the other foot. So no, he wasn't angry, but he knew he needed to establish some rapport with the Uzumaki boy. With these new medications that would be arriving from Kiri soon, he would soon be back on his feet, and his disease cured. But still, while he had witnessed the boy's skill and sheer power firsthand, he could tell that a storm was brewing, a storm that, even Naruto's great power, would not be able to hold off alone. Yoshihiro smirked. Sounded just like his kind of fun. Sunagekure, Kazakage Tower 12 days after the fall of IWA. Gaara sat in his office, looking at the document that had long been in the coming. The council had long been in the deliberation of this matter, for an entire week even. But it had finally been decided, and now, all that remained was his seal of approval. As the Kazakage was about to reach for his calligraphy brush, however, a messenger bird suddenly perched on his windowsill, catching his attention, especially with the insignia around its neck. Sakai 12 days since the fall of IWA. Naruto stood along the wall, overlooking the city he had recently taken. Reinforcements had arrived the other day from Kusa and Aim, bringing their numbers back up to standard. Some more forces had arrived from Oto, which he quickly dispatched onto IWA, to enforce their military presence. All in all, his men were prepared to march into battle again, to bring about the final stages of their plans. He heard the shuffling of feet approaching him. Turning, he found Hinata approaching him, her pale lavender eyes staring back into his own blood-red ones. Naruto-sama. She bowed respectfully. Hinata. He greeted back with a slight nod of his head. She turned her head back to look over the city, awaiting his instructions. You are to head to IWA, assume command of the situation there. Until a suitable overseer can be stationed there, you are to remain as the temporary overseer, as well as the commander for our Northwestern Defense Forces. You may take Rock Lee and Tenten with you. Shino, Toshiro and Mika are to remain here, overlooking the repairs and security of the city. Hataki, Kakashi and Guan shall march with me. His voice drawled out, somehow managing to make his bored tone sound fiercer than the angry voices of many. She nodded. As you command. However, my lord, may I question where you are marching? Suna or Kumo? His response was merely a sideward glance. I see. She answered before she bowed. Very well. Naruto watched her turn and leave, never removing his eyes from her until she was out of sight and her footsteps fading from his ears. He allowed his eyes to travel skywards. This land shall be mine. Chapter 52, It is Time. Naruto currently made his way through Iwa's mountain borders, his armies trudging along as they did their best to traverse the jagged, cutting stalagmites that made up the mountain face, like a great wall of razor-sharp spears, guarding Iwa's boundaries against any who would dare invade. Naruto-sama! The voice of Kakashi reached him as the copy and made his way up along with Akiri Chunin, bowing once before he continued speaking. Naruto-sama, Guan's found a pathway. It leads down the mountain, and appears to place us near the border. Naruto nodded. Very well, tell the commanders of this route, give them the coordinates, and tell them to lead their men through it. Kakashi nodded and then looked at Kiri Chunin. You heard him, get to it. Go to the commanders of Squad Alpha and Sigma, I'll head to Beta. Yes, sir. The man bowed once before he vanished in a cloud of smoke, Kakashi following shortly after. Naruto allowed his eyes to travel up skywards, where rain clouds ahead had thankfully begun to part. Soon, very soon now. The echoing sound of Liang's and Tsunade's footsteps seemed to echo down the hallway as they made their way up to the Raikage Tower. You sent a message to Suna? The legendary medic questioned with a raised eyebrow as she continued to walk up the stairs. Do you think that they'll cooperate once you speak with them? Liang didn't answer for a moment before he took a breath and spoke. Whether they cooperate or not does not matter, they will soon attack Konoha regardless of their Kazakage's initial decision. I don't think I will follow, Tsunade said as she raised an eyebrow. Liang merely closed his eyes for a brief moment. You will soon enough, he clarified in his own way before he came across the door of his office, opening the wooden obstacle before he entered. Jiraiya the Toad stood on the balcony of the tower. His stewardship of the lands while Naruto was away was going fairly smoothly. Still, the older man couldn't help but be vastly impressed with Naruto as each day passed. The sheer amounts of paperwork one had to shift through every single day. It was enough to drive him mad if he knew he was stuck doing this forever. Economies that needed to be balanced, supplies that needed to be sent, missions that had to be overseen, military divisions that needed to be rounded and stationed, upstarts and political revolutionaries that needed to be silenced, and not to mention, last but not least, the organization of the new campaign that was being led. While Naruto had arranged and fixed the vast majority of it, what little Jiraiya did have to do was enough to make him cringe. Still, the vast amounts of paperwork weren't what he was worried over. There was something wrong, he couldn't explain it. But he had a gut feeling, and these tended to be proven right most of the time. There was some strange chill in the air, a change of sorts. Something was certainly wrong, and whatever it was, he had little doubt it would all come to a head soon. Centering around Naruto. The boy was strong, unbelievably so. To the point where if Jiraiya was posed a question over who would win between all of Konoha's military generals and him, he truly couldn't give a definitive answer to that. But with that strength came something that even Naruto was not immune to. Arrogance. The boy planned, he prepared, and he did research on his enemy as all good shinobis do, and as was imbued to him during his training as a child. But more often than not recently, as his raw power felled all those who had risen against him with little to no trouble, despite even the best and most elaborate of schemes to defeat him, the boy had simply begun overlooking his opponent, so to speak. He would simply not care over what plans they could develop, or what elaborate schemes they could put together. Simply because he considered, and in most cases was above anything their skills could accomplish, even with the advantages of plans. Oftentimes, Naruto wasn't even truly aware he did it. But Jiraiya knew he had seen a great many ninjas fall to such petty things, his old teammate, Orochimaru, having been one of them. Having the audacity to show up at Konoha itself with just a few ninja as his escort, he was struck down by a power even he held no chance against. The Toad Hermit could only sigh. Whatever happened happened, and he did not have the authority to advance any troops anywhere unless it was an absolute emergency, and one of his hunches, or gut feelings, didn't count. Naruto currently stood on a small hill overlooking the camp his men had set up. Already a perimeter had been established and patrols were circling the place. He heard footsteps. Turning his head slightly, he found Guan approaching him silently. When he finally reached him, the man stood at his side for a brief moment before he spoke. "Lord, do you not think it is dangerous to be standing in the open like this?" Naruto did not answer, his eyes traveling over the scenery before him, the silence stretching about. Guan was used to these silences, and so took no offense in it. Instead, he merely crossed his arms over his chest and stood at the blonde's side, his slightly taller form standing like that of a bodyguard. "Strange, isn't it?" was the sudden remark that Guan had to do a double take to make sure it had come from Naruto. "Lord?" he questioned. "All these years they seem to have gone by so quickly. It seems like only yesterday you and Jinchiko were surrendering Kiri, and now we stand here upon this threshold into a new world." Guan was struck speechless. Never before had Naruto spoken in such a strange tone. No, not strange, human. Clearing his throat, the man regained his composure before he spoke. "It may seem that way sometimes, but indeed soon this world of war and death shall be finished. And we shall enter a new world, one of peace." The man nodded to himself solemnly. Naruto spared a glance at the older man from the corner of his eye. "Guan, I never apologized," he said, ignoring the man's startled look, "for the loss of your eye all those years ago." The appointed second in command of the 7 swordsmen was rendered quite mute for a long time, his eyes visibly wide with shock as he stared down at the man that had set out to conquer the world. "And my lord," he stuttered uncharacteristically as he bowed low. There is no need for such a thing. It was my own carelessness that brought this wound about. Please, do not apologize to your loyal servant." Naruto grunted softly, not denying but not admitting his correctness on his statement. "You and Lady Jinchiko have served me loyally for many long years. Once this chaos is over, I will see you properly rewarded," he stated firmly. "There is no need for such a lord. You are the one that will bring about an age of peace in this land. It is as Hidetada would have wanted." It had been a long time since Naruto had heard the name of the Kiri swordsman he had led to his death nearly a decade ago. It was something scarcely talked about, even among Jinchiko and Guan themselves, the two people closest to the late shinobi. Naruto looked to Guan once more, a loyal servant indeed. Slowly the blonde turned and began making his way down to the camp, Guan following after him a moment later. Gaara sat in one of the various lounge rooms of the tower, a thoughtful look in his eyes and a contemplative frown on his face. Kankuro paced beside him, angrily muttering under his breath. "Damn it, Gaara, I don't have enough patience for these bullshit meetings of yours." Gaara ignored his brother's crass remark as the door to their room opened, Temari stepping through it a moment later, her fan strapped to her back once again. "Where have you been?" her brother snapped. "You're not in the best shape, sis, you need to rest, not go parading around this tower." Temari was about to respond when Gaara spoke. "Kankuro, she said she was going to go for a walk. It's understandable that she took the time she took." "But Gaara," the older boy said before he snorted, crossing his arms. "Fine, whatever. When one of the messengers shows up saying that they found her passed out on the side of the street, don't complain to me," he huffed. Gaara ignored his annoyed older brother and turned his eyes onto Temari, who approached one of the chairs, setting down her fan and falling onto the selected piece of furniture. "Temari," Gaara called, bringing her eyes onto him. He noticed the slight bags under them, as well as the tired haze within them. "Are you certain you should have left the hospital so soon? You look exhausted." She shook her head. "I'm a little tired, but no. You need help in order to get a handle on this situation." She smiled. "And what kind of sister would I be if I just left my little brother to rot under all this paperwork while I get to sit by and enjoy hospital food and bedding?" Gaara smirked, but it soon fell. "By the way, I've been meaning to ask you if you've spoken to Hana? I would have liked to have checked up on her myself, but I didn't get the chance before this situation needed to be attended to." Temari sighed as she nodded. "Yeah, I managed to speak to her once. Before I left, she really doesn't look well. I think that once you get a chance you should give her a paid leave of absence, have her rest up, get her head clear." Gaara nodded. "I'll see to it." Before he looked at the door and stood up, several footsteps reached his ears from down the hallway. "Good, they've arrived. We can get this meeting underway." Hana groaned in discomfort as she felt the feeble grip of sleep become even weaker under the insistent and constant shaking of another. Her bloodshot eyes opened slowly, weakly from the recent strain on her mind and body. Tear streaks ran down her face, and the table beneath her head was wet with salt water. "Hana?" Sakura's hesitant voice reached her ears, bringing the Inuzuka girl's brown eyes up towards her. She questioned as she rubbed the sleep out of her eyes. "Oh, Sakura? What is it?" she questioned, wiping her eyes as she looked away from the pink-haired medic as she began shifting through some of the documents on her desk. Ever since the attack and subsequent return to Suna, Hana had thrown herself into her work, trying to bury herself in her duties as a council member and clan head over what remained of the Inuzuka clan. She had scarcely slept or eaten in the last few days since their arrival. They had decided to leave her to her own devices, allowing her the freedom in order to clear her mind and get herself together, recover from both their physical and emotional defeat, as well as Kiba's condition. Looking at her now, Sakura could tell that it had been a mistake, a very bad one. Hana's once healthy and tan skin was paler, her features sickly and seemingly thin from lack of food, her hair matted down and limp, black bags gathering under bloodshot eyes and tear-streaked cheeks. "Hana," Sakura spoke slowly, carefully. "Have you been eating or sleeping at all, for that matter?" Hana released a dry laugh, filled with forced humor. "Of course, Sakura, I'm fine. Why would you say something like that?" "Because complaints from your clan members have come in saying that you've been cooped up in this office for 2 days. Hana paused in her motions, but soon recovered. "I've been busy, Sakura, work backed up with my leaving, you know. I can't just let it keep on dash." "Hana," Sakura interrupted gently, grasping Hana's shoulder and turning the girl to face her. Watching as she avoided her gaze as best she could, her downtrodden expression and moistening eyes pulled on Sakura's heartstrings. "Hana, don't do this to yourself. Come on, come with me and let's get you something to eat, a change of clothes and to get some rest." Hana shook her head. "No, I have to." "Hana, don't punish yourself for what happened, it's not your fault. Now please, let's get out of here, huh?" The Inuzuka girl weakly shook her head. No, it should be me laying there, not Kiba. Sakura moved forward and wrapped the Inuzuka girl in a comforting embrace, feeling the older girl wrap her arms around her waist from where she sat. The Inuzuka woman's hands tightened into fists, almost desperately clinging to the pink-haired medic, her sobs growing in volume as the dam over her emotions crumbled. She felt Hana's clenched fists repeatedly, weakly hitting her back. Her muffled words, "It should have been me," repeating themselves through her sobs. Sakura held the girl close, letting her tears moisten her clothes. "Sure," she cooed. It's all right. No, it wasn't your fault, Hana. Kiba wouldn't want you to do this to yourself." As her whispered words left her lips, Sakura forced her own tears back. To see such a strong eunuch fall like this was something that truly hurt, and Sakura couldn't help the pain that bloomed in her chest as she wondered just how much more pain Hana, Kiba, and the others would have to suffer at the hands of that devil before he was finally brought down. How much more sorrow? Zhuge Liang sat in one of the many rooms of the tower, currently attending the foreign delegates that were currently in Kumo when one of the Chunin practically tore down the door. Breathing heavily, eyes filled with fear. Keiko dash. The man never needed to finish his sentence before an explosion was seen out the balcony, along the southern wall. Liang's eyes narrowed minutely as he stood up from his chair. So they have finally come then. Naruto stood along the wall of the city, the battle around him beginning as Kumo and Umbu that guarded the wall fought to hold them off. Akina's form could be seen running from rooftop to rooftop, making her way to the wall as fast as she could, dozens of Chunin, Jounin, Umbu, and even Genin, hot on her tail as they too moved to defend their city. It's time. Chapter 53, The New World. The sound of hundreds of bloody screams and cries of death tore through the air like a weak, hungry beast, clawing at the rotting corpse of another's kill. The coldness of death, and the rank smell of blood hung over the city like flies. It gripped it with an iron hold. Naruto now walked among the streets of the city, his troops having torn past the unprepared defenders on the wall long ago. Specks of blood were visible along his form, as well as his gauntlets, his two scimitars in their sheaths as he still did not need them. Behind him was a literal trail of bodies and body parts, red soaking into the cold stones of Kumo streets, flowing like a river due to the city's downward slope. There he is! The Jinchuriki heard a voice behind him. Turning, he found what he assumed were two Kumo Jounins as well as 4 Chunins. They looked upon the trail of death left behind by him, their reactions ranging from disgust, to horror, to outrage. With a cry of rage, one of the Jounin took out a kunai, charging it with lightning chakra until it formed a sword of sorts. He rushed the Kage of Konoha, the others following after him a moment later. It was quick, unbelievably so. With a flutter of crimson and metal, claws tore flesh from bones, snapping limbs, tearing and slicing, until the only one that remained was a young Chunin, his throat gripped in the iron fist of the Konoha Jinchuriki. He was young, no older than 16, his fearful green eyes staring back at him, reflecting the cold look of apathy within his glowing red orbs, blood flowing down from a gash on his forehead, flowing down his eyes and lower to his cheeks. Naruto seemed to look at the boy over once, his crimson pools never leaving this child's eyes. Then he felt a presence, approaching him very fast, very familiar. Stop! The cry reached his ears, bringing his attention to the person it belonged to. His ruby-red eyes gleaming as they traveled to the roof of the 2-story building at his side, his grip never leaving the gasping boy's neck. He recognized her instantly, even after a decade. That face was still burned into his memory. He watched her eyes glance down worriedly at the young man in his grasp, and he allowed his own eyes to turn to the boy's, who was now looking at the new arrival with hope and pleading. Without a second thought, Naruto's fingers twitched and a sickening snap broke through the air and reached each of their ears, and Naruto watched as the shock of the boy's gaze, the disbelief, slowly faded, leaving nothing but sightless orbs that feebly grasped at life, until the faint light within them too went out. No! The girl's cry reached him. Naruto threw the lifeless form aside before he turned, catching the girl's weapon in his clawed hand. He stared down at her then, her eyes turning from crystal blue to blood red in a second, red chakra beginning to form around her as she glared up at his taller form, the glow of his own red eyes visible clearly as he looked up to her. So it is you! The one-eyed swordsman of Kiri tore past another squadron of Kumo's Umbu, sprays of crimson falling around him, his single hazel brown eye taking in the other battles going on. The Kumo ninja were losing ground, and they were losing ground fast. Almost too fast. Soon Kakashi appeared in a plume of smoke next to the man. I've taken care of my side. Do you need any help with yours? Renewed cries caught both men's attention, turning their eyes to find more Kumo Umbu and Jounin making their way into the fight. One of the new arrivals in particular caught his eye. Soft, shoulder-length black hair, deep blue kimono and a chakra scalpel in one hand. Oh yes, he recognized that one. No Hataki, I do not require your... The man paused and soon both Jounin leapt back. A moment later the earth shattering beneath where they had previously been standing, a loud boom making their ears ring as they landed on a rooftop of a now dangerously unstable building. As the dust finally settled they found the form of the legendary medic and granddaughter to the first Hokage standing amongst the rubble, her fist near the ground as she glared at them. Kakashi's eyes narrowed as he removed his Hittite from his eyes. Tsunade-sama, so this is where you've been hiding all these years. Please, do not make this more difficult than what it must be. The blonde Sanin's eyes narrowed. Hataki's still so scrawny. Why don't you go back and take your men with you? I'm not someone you want to mess with. No doubt. Kakashi nodded. But we have a job to do, and if we have to, we will go through you, isn't that right, my one-eyed friend? Take care of her, Hataki. I have other business to attend to. The swordsman spoke offhandedly, making his way towards where he could see Shizen fighting some aim and Taki ninja under their command. Wait, what? Was Kakashi's startled query as his partner began to leave. While he was pretty certain that they could defeat the legendary medic together, alone he wasn't so sure. He's certainly not going to put it past the medic to still be in shape for a fight at her age, especially with that little incident with Yoshihiro. Hey, wait a second. You can't just leave me here. The copy trailed off uneasily as his eyes turned back to the, now smirking, Tsunade. Well, Runt, you don't seem so confident now. She grinned, loving his slightly troubled expression. While she knew she was far from her prime, she was still confident in her chances of defeating the copy Nin. Kakashi let out a small curse, promising himself that if he survived this he was going to kill Guan. Settling himself in a straight stance, his hands held in a seal. All right then, before he began the rest of the seals. Shizen, who was currently attending one of the wounded, had just finished deflecting some kunai aimed at her and her patient when she heard the sound of fluttering clothes behind her, approaching quickly. And so, thinking fast, she rolled forward, in time to avoid the blade that tried to take her head clean off her shoulders. Spinning around on her heel, she found a large and very familiar form standing over her patient, the man's throat crushed under his boot, his dying gurgles sickening to Shizen's ears as she watched him writhe in pain before his gurgles finally ceased, as did his movements. Impressive, came Guan's voice, bringing her attention up to him. You seem to have grown well, girl. The man placed his blade to rest on his shoulders. Allow me to see if this assumption is correct. Shizen swallowed the lump of fear in her throat. She certainly remembered this man, and while she had grown in strength since those days, she was sure he had as well. She could only hope she would be up to the task. Naruto's form exploded from the side of one of Kumo's various homes, wood and stone debris flying through the air in his wake, another form exploding out of the dust a moment later, revealing Akina, her three-piece staff already in mid-swing. Naruto landed on the adjacent rooftop, raising his hand and blocking the incoming swing with a loud sound of metal against metal. He saw the girl growl before she delivered another strike with the other end of her weapon, this one aimed at his knee. Naruto, in response, did a swift spin jump, pivoting in midair so that his form was parallel to the ground before he lashed out with a kick, connecting with the girl's throat, causing her to stumble and choke. Naruto landed once again with billowing crimson around him as he stared at his sister's choking form as she struggled to loosen her now sore throat. Akina glared at him for all she was worth, her angry snarls and growls reaching his ears. His infuriating voice drawled slowly from his lips as he spoke. Is this it? All that you have to offer, girl? Her anger rose, a lone bubbling tail of crimson chakra forming behind her, as she summoned more of the fox's strength from within herself. Naruto allowed his eyes to travel down to the golden bracers along his wrist, watching as they sizzled with smoke rising from them. It appears his own demonic chakra was reacting to her presence. Interesting. The eldest of the siblings was forced to tear his attention away from the wristbands as his sister released a roar, lashing out with a single claw of red chakra that rushed him. Raising his own arms, he coated them with blue chakra as he crisscrossed them in front of himself, bracing against the impact which arrived a moment later. Channeling chakra to his feet, he managed to stay attached to the floor. That did not mean the roof tiles did, shattering and cracking as he skidded down the length of the roof, coming to a stop at the very edge. Naruto's eyes pierced the veil of red, once again meeting his sister's as the claw of chakra attempted to overpower him. A flash of the fox's face, smiling with gleaming white fangs and eyes dancing with hellish amusement, flashed before his mind's eye. Most interesting. Doton, Dorian, no! Was Kakashi's cry before a large earth dragon went charging straight at Tsunade, only for the beast to meet the woman's fist and be smashed into the rubble from whence it came. The woman's victory was short-lived, however, as Kakashi appeared from the ground behind her, kunai in hand as he thrust it to the back of her head. Sunda ducked, spinning on her heel as she formed a chakra scalpel in her hand and thrust it towards the Sharingan wielder's ribs, only for Kakashi to grab hold of her wrist and plunge his kunai into the juncture of her neck and shoulder. His smirk died on his lips, however, as Tsunade formed another chakra scalpel in her free hand and this time succeeded in cutting some tendons in his leg. He cursed before leaping back, falling onto one knee as he was unprepared for the weakness in the injured leg. Tsunade meanwhile pulled the kunai from her flesh and formed a healing technique, breathing heavily due to the pain as she looked at Kakashi with a smirk on her face. "Careful, Runt, I can afford to get injured, you can't." Kakashi cursed. He should have guessed. Tsunade was renowned as both the strongest and fastest of the. He had read some of her books, in which she advised all medics that they, above all others in the team, must not let themselves get injured, made that obvious. He should have anticipated that she would allow an injury to come to her just to injure him. She could heal it, he could not. She had probably positioned her body so it wouldn't hit a vital area. He, meanwhile, was crippled. Oh, he was definitely gonna kick Guan's green-wearing ass when he saw him next. Shizen meanwhile was in the exact opposite situation. While she was holding her ground valiantly against the swordsman of Kiri, his greater experience, chakra capacity, and sheer raw power was beginning to wear at her. The only edge that she held over him was in speed and in range techniques. That sword, however, was proving to be a capable shield as well as its obvious use. She was breathing heavily as she stood across from him, grime and sweat marring her normally porcelain skin. It was with a heave of determination that she found the strength to rush him again. Pulling back her sleeve, she revealed a small mechanism on her arm which shot several poisoned Saban needles at the man, as well as several Saban needles which she launched from her mouth. Guan moved to place his blade in front of him again to block the incoming projectiles when he heard Shizen's voice. "Saban Kaiga Bunshin no," followed shortly after by Kaiu. There was a minor cyclone of wind that formed around him, and Guan soon found himself surrounded by hundreds of Saban needles caught in the spinning vortex. Shizen's hands closed tightly together, and it was with no small amount of satisfaction that she saw the needles and air currents come crashing down around the area Guan had been standing. When the dust cleared, however, she couldn't stop the look of shock and the curse that escaped her lips. Guan stood, in the exact same spot, completely unharmed, a spinning shield of water around him, holding the needles within it as if the water were made of jelly. "Impressive," Guan said slowly before he dispelled his water shield, allowing the needles to fall around him with numerous little clatters. Zhuge Liang walked slowly towards the edge of the roof of his tower, watching as the Konoha nuns came deeper and deeper into the city, their greater numbers cutting down all those who stood before them. He could see them charging up the main road, heading straight towards the tower. "Someday, my fair city, I hope you can forgive me for what I must do," he spoke solemnly before he raised the white-plumed fan high above his head, releasing a great burst of lightning that shot up into the sky. Seconds later, dozens of massive explosions tore through different sections of the city. Those on the main road were blown to bits, since the bombs were under the street, the orange glow of flames rapidly beginning to spread throughout the city as embers slowly rose towards the heavens. Liang didn't turn away from the scene, but instead stared upon it with apathy before he too raised his eyes to the sky above. "For sacrifices are necessary if we are to survive this war." Naruto leaned back, avoiding another of Akina's swings with the three-piece staff, which was now charged with lightning, before he stepped forward into her follow-up swing and slashed her with his claws, tearing the flesh in great chunks from the left side of her abdomen down to her left hip. She released another cry of pain before she was silenced by a backhand delivered across her face, which threw her off the rooftop, falling to the ground below in a heap, the wound already healed as she moved to stand once again. Naruto stared at her with cold boredom. her breathing heavy as sweat and blood matted her hair down onto her forehead and the back of her neck. It was then a golden glow behind him managed to catch his attention. Turning, he found several bright flashes of white lightning shooting skywards from the very top of the Reikage Tower. His eyes narrowed, but soon he felt Akina's presence begin to get farther and farther. Turning, he barely managed to see the faint trail of red chakra before it too vanished around the corner. He only had a moment to wonder why she ran when the building beneath him began to shake, and a moment later he was engulfed in a massive fireball, his roar drowned out by the explosions that followed. Kakashi didn't know what had happened. 1 second he was dodging punches and kicks from the greatest medic to ever walk the earth, launching as many long-range jutsu as he knew in order to try and hold her off. The pain and muscle weakness in his leg, however, was putting him at a severe disadvantage. But the next thing he knew, a bright flash came from the top of the tower and Tsunade just ran. He saw as she passed right by Guan and grabbed an injured Shizen before she bolted down the corner, several Kumo ninja hot on her heels, leaving a very confused coalition army behind them. Then the explosions came. Naruto's eyes slowly opened, pain burning through his abdomen as he tried to get back to his feet, observing the scene of carnage and destruction around him. Hundreds of buildings blown to bits, charred corpses, some whole, some missing several body parts depending on how close each one of them was to the explosion. He himself had barely had any time to use a kawarimi, and if it had not been for the fact that he required no hand seals for it, he was certain he'd be dead. Alas, it was only a few buildings and areas that remained mostly intact, no doubt where the Kumo ninja had hid. He clutched his abdomen, which he now realized was bleeding horribly, chunks of burnt flesh and skin hanging from the gaping injury which was only now beginning to heal. He hissed as he finally managed to get to his feet, stumbling slightly. He took his blood-covered gauntlet and ran it over one of the seals on his wristbands, welcoming the familiar burn of Yuki coursing through his system, the red wisps forming an outline around him. Soon, however, he heard footsteps approaching him, and felt the familiarity of her presence. He turned slowly, finding his younger sibling, staring at his injured form with a look that was crossed somewhere between satisfaction and hatred. "I see that you're not invincible after all." Naruto allowed his eyes to travel away from her back up to the sky, before he began circling her, his steps measured yet seemingly careless, as if he was strolling. "So," he drawled, his deep resonating voice reaching them both as he looked upon the sight of the devastation. "Is this what you desire as a child? You hate me so much? Such that you would destroy the city that took you in?" Akina growled. "I would see 100 cities destroyed if it meant seeing your corpse at my feet." Naruto let loose a few dry chuckles, strange sounds which sent ice running up and down her spine. "Truly? Then tell me, dear sister, how does that make you any different from me?" Akina growled. "Don't you dare ever call me your sister! Just because we share the same bijou does not mean I am related to some cruel monster like you in any way." Naruto had looked at her as she spoke, finding no recognition in her eyes at his statement, just affronted with anger and hatred. "You mean you truly don't know then?" he remarked slowly, almost to himself, but Akina had heard it, her eyes narrowing in mild confusion before she shook it off, dismissing the strange statement as best she could. Naruto chuckled again at that point, his hand traveling to the hilt of his sword. "If you want me dead, dear sister, then you had better come at me with your best." "Gladly," she growled, red chakra exploding outwards, forming her second tail before she rushed him, the three-pieced weapon flaring with lightning as she swung at a downward angle, aiming for the left junction of his neck, when he batted the piece away with his own blade, before he brought it down from left to right to block the second swing aimed for his right leg. And then another for his left side before he delivered a thrust aimed for the girl's stomach, only for Akina to backpedal while spinning rapidly, twisting her weapon so it was folded up, the three sections behind her back. She continued spinning as she leapt up, Naruto rushing forward to get in range again when she stopped mid-spin, launching her weapon in such a way so that the tip of one end was aimed to hit right between his eyes. Naruto reacted quickly though as he raised his sword above his head and brought it straight down, the ringing loud in his ears as the two metals clashed together. As the impact ignited a small spark, Naruto used it, launching a wind attack with his swing and empowering it with flames that exploded in his younger sibling's face. Naruto was disappointed, however, as he felt the girl replace herself with an item behind him. Spinning around, he saw her swing the three-piece staff again, this time with her gripping the very end of the weapon, which would make it wrap around Naruto and hit him on the side she was swinging from, as well as his back and his other side. He acted quickly, bringing the sword in his right hand to go along his left side, blocking the attack. He then felt the hard impact against his lower back, grunting in pain as he felt the shock from the electricity burn his back and run up and down his spine. His movements now a bit more stiff and sluggish, he coated his left hand with chakra before bringing it to his right side and catching the weapon in his grip, thereby locking it in place around him. His sword, however, remained free as he pulled it up, free of Akina's as he tried to swing at the girl. Only for her to lean to one side and then duck under the follow-up before she formed a chakra scalpel in her hand, this one too laced with lightning chakra before she thrust it towards his throat. Only for Naruto to vanish in a cloud of smoke when the attack connected. Akina didn't have much time to react before a sword suddenly went through her, coming out of her stomach, right below her ribs. She stumbled as she coughed up copious amounts of blood. The third tail began to bubble to life as she growled and glanced behind her, glaring at the form that stared back. "You can never compare to me," he spoke coldly. "Dear sister." Before he savagely yanked the blade out of her and delivered a quick, brutal hit to the back of her head, knocking her completely unconscious, her weapon clattering noisily to the charred earth. He walked to her side, nudging her roughly with his boot to roll her onto her side. He looked at her for a moment before he pressed the tip of his blade against her throat, his eyes gleaming with an unidentified emotion before he raised the blade above his head and brought it down to cut her throat. Before he was able to complete the task, however, a surge of chakra behind him had him leaping away, just before a lightning bolt flew past the area where he previously stood, above Akina, leaving her unharmed. Landing a few yards away from his previous position, he turned slightly and found a man, dressed in white with trimmed mustache and goatee staring at him, a white feathered fan in his hand. "Naruto-sama." He greeted me with a small bow. His eyes traveled a bit to the side where 3 Anbu landed. Naruto ignored them, however, and focused his attention on the white-clad man. "I assumed that you would be the Reikage. Hyuga Liang, the sleeping dragon." Liang nodded. "Yes, I am. And you would be Uzumaki Naruto, the so-called Devil King." Naruto was about to respond when he felt a tingle at the back of his mind. "Kai." He spoke, and for a moment the scene appeared hazy. When it cleared, it revealed Akina, being carried away by 2 medics. The medics looked upon him in fear but didn't get far before several wind blades tore them apart. Naruto then allowed his eyes to travel back to Liang, who held a visibly troubled expression on his face. Apparently, the so-called sleeping dragons were not as strong as fabled. He had barely noticed it, true, but still, it felt like all before him. Liang made a quick hand gesture, which Naruto caught, and the blonde was forced to raise his blade to block the assault from the 3 Anbu that had previously arrived. 2 of them appeared to be long-range specialists, and the largest one obviously being a close-range specialist. Naruto dealt with the close-range individual swiftly, blocking his upward swing with his blade before he formed a single Rasengan in hand and smashed it against the man's stomach, watching as blood exploded from his back as the swirling sphere tore right through him. Naruto grunted in pain as a kunai soon found its way into his side, thrown from one of the long-range specialists. He attacked him next, appearing in front of the visibly startled man in a second. He tried to turn and run, but a swift kick to the small of his back stopped him, in which Naruto could feel and hear the man's spine snap. Either he was dead, or paralyzed for the rest of his life. Vanishing again, he appeared next to the third, who only had a split second to react before his claws tore through Anbu's stomach. He clutched the injury, hacking up what must have been blood as he crumpled down to the cold stone of Kumo's destroyed streets, before he fell forward completely, face in the dirt. Naruto then turned to Liang, but found something on the man's face he did not expect. A smirk. And it was with that smirk that the man's voice reached him. "Congratulations, Naruto-sama. You've just won me this war." "What?" was the blonde's confused reply. His confusion left him, however, as Liang waved to his fan. "Kai," came the Kage's bored voice. The entire scenery became hazy for a moment before it fell away, revealing the 3 Anbu to have never been Anbu at all. The close-range fighter was not even human, but several broken pieces of wood resembling splinters more than any real form. If he had to guess, it would be a puppet. But there were no known puppet users in Kumo, only Suna held them, so what was one doing here? He then allowed his eyes to travel to his second opponent, this one garbed in black, with purple face paint, used by Suna's puppet users. Then he looked to the third. This one, he recognized instantly as the girl he had fought back at Sakai. But this time, around her arm, he recognized the Suna headband. Then another presence became known to him. This one he too recognized. The vessel of Shikaku the Kazekage. He looked to Liang then, the man's slight smirk still on his lips as he began circling Naruto, speaking with his familiar, bland tone. You underestimated me, Naruto-sama. The illusion you dispelled was a weaker one, and so you never bothered to look deeper, to look underneath the underneath. You sent a message to Suna? The legendary medic questioned with a raised eyebrow as she continued to walk up the stairs. Do you think that they'll cooperate once you speak with them? Liang didn't answer for a moment before he took a breath and spoke. Whether they cooperate or not does not matter. They will soon attack Konoha regardless of their Kazekage's initial decision. I don't think I will follow, Tsunade said as she raised an eyebrow. Liang merely closed his eyes for a brief moment. You will soon enough, he clarified in his own way before he came across the door of his office, opening the wooden obstacle before he entered. He found the three currently sitting forms of the Kazekage and his siblings. Kazekage-dano, welcome. Liang continued to speak as he circled the young Kage from Konoha. I called the Kazekage here, to discuss an alliance with him. In order to defeat you as per tradition, he responded and came to the village. However, his council from Suna had finally settled on a decision, the decision to surrender to you. Thus, leaving Kumo to be the only one left that could challenge you. He straightened and took a deep breath. Zhuge Liang sat in one of the many rooms of the tower, currently attending the foreign delegates that were currently in Kumo when one of the Chunin practically tore down the door. Breathing heavily, eyes filled with fear. Keiko dash. The man never needed to finish his sentence before an explosion was seen out the balcony, along the southern wall. Liang's eyes narrowed minutely as he stood up from his chair. So they have finally come then. Liang turned, facing the Kazekage of Suna and his siblings, forming an unseen hand seal. I would ask for your assistance in this fight, Kazekage-dano. Gaara sighed. You see, when it was clear they would not assist me, I was forced to take some measures to ensure their cooperation. I placed all three of them into an illusion. Forgive me, Reikage-dano. But Suna must not become involved in this fight. Gaara spoke solemnly. It was Temari who startled him, however. Gaara, I think we should help them, even though Suna has agreed to a surrender. We should not allow innocent people to die here. Very well, Reikage-dano. We shall assist you in this fight. Gaara's statement surprised Temari and Kankuro. His eldest sibling voiced her objections. But Gaara, Suna can't become involved in this. Gaara nodded. Temari, I won't just stand by and watch this destruction if I can prevent it. Assist me or don't. Caught off guard by her brother's authoritative tone, Temari couldn't bring herself to object further on the subject and merely nodded. And so it is that Suna has aided us in this battle, and I separated them during it, luring Gaara away from his siblings and his siblings closer here, so that they would fight you. To ensure that they would, I formed another genjutsu to make it seem as if you were about to strike down Gaara, their brother. And one, obviously, over you to make them seem like my own men. He seemed to sigh before he looked at Naruto's silent form. And you, being who you are, I knew would not hesitate to cut them down. Now, because of your cruelty, all of Suna will rise up in arms against you, and the Kazekage's rage will know no bounds. Naruto remained silent for a very long time after that. When he spoke, his voice was somehow different, but still as ruthless and hollow as ever. Suna would have surrendered. Tell me, Zhuge Liang, why is it that you would seek to perpetuate the chaos? Liang was visibly startled by the question, but he cleared his throat and spoke nonetheless. Naruto-sama, to me, there is no doubt at least in my mind, that you are the man necessary to bring about peace. You are not, however, the man that can lead peace. So, you would lead the world in place of me then? Naruto drawled with a roll of his eyes. Liang shook his head. No, Naruto-sama. You see, the reason you are not the man to lead peace is simply because you are a shinobi. It is that simple. I, however, am not the one to lead it either, for I am not the kind of man the people will follow. No, I am afraid that under both of us, a lasting peace is not possible to achieve. The Reikage shook his head for a moment. But still, it is necessary to at the very least remove you, in order to have a hope of peace succeeding in this war-torn land. Naruto was again silent after that. He could feel the various chakra signatures approaching him now, the Kazekage, Kakashi, Guan, as well as one he faintly recognized as Tsunade. He looked down to Temari and Kankuro. They did indeed seem dead. When he looked back to Liang, he was about to speak when his ears caught something in the wind. Something faint, a heartbeat. He looked to the source, and found it was from Temari. Her heartbeat steady but faint. The cogs slowly worked in Naruto's mind, and the blonde soon found himself smirking faintly beneath his mask. "I'm afraid, Jiga Liang, sleeping dragon, that your plan will fail," he remarked as he began making his way to Temari. Liang didn't say anything, but he visibly tensed as he watched the Jinchuriki approach the girl. "You underestimated." He leaned down and picked Temari up, tossing her over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. "This one, she is still alive." Liang's eyes widened. If Naruto captured one of them alive, then he could use her as a bargaining chip with Gaara. He would trade her safe return for Suna's surrender. Even in his brilliance, the sleeping dragon had arrogantly removed one element from his calculations, an element most scientists tended to leave out as well: the human element. Liang raised his fan to deliver an attack, when Naruto spun around and launched his own, releasing a wave of fire towards the wreckage. The older man was forced to switch onto the defensive as he released a great cyclone of wind, diverting the flames and spreading them so they would miss him, as well as Akina, who seemed to be coming to. "Naruto-sama!" came the cry of Hotaki Kakashi as the man leapt over some debris, Guan and several dozen Umbu, Chunin and Jounin behind him, all of them injured. "Naruto-sama, we have to retreat. Our front line has been wiped out and we can't hold off the Kumonins much longer." He breathed heavily as he favored one leg, a large splinter of wood digging into his side. Naruto nodded, and he allowed his eyes to travel towards Juga, who stood on the other side of the wall of flames, a glare visible in his hazel-brown eyes. "I will see you fail, Juga Liang." The blonde then allowed his eyes to travel to Akina, who finally seemed to be regaining consciousness, before they finally came to stop, on their most recent arrival, the Kazekage himself, who stared upon his sister's form over his shoulder with a look of fear, one which soon morphed into rage as his turquoise-green eyes turned onto him. "Uzumaki!" he roared. "You will release her now. If you wish for her Kazekage, then I will contact you soon, and we shall form a trade." Naruto responded before he turned to Kakashi and Guan. "Sound the retreat, we've been bested today," he said before he began fleeing from the charred remains of Kumo, the Kazekage's sister in hand. Liang watched as Naruto left, the Kazekage soon hot on his heels. Turning to the nearest captain, he spoke. "Gather your men, pursue them." The captain nodded before he vanished in a puff of smoke. The wreckage then turned to the medic attending Akina. "Once she's coherent, tell her to join the pursuit. I will go on ahead," he continued, not allowing the medic to speak before he leapt over the flames, soon catching up to the Kazekage as they pursued the remains of the Konoha invasion force. Chapter 54. It should have been now. Naruto's legs burned already. They had been running for nearly a full day, and still he could feel the Kazekage and the wreckage's presence nipping at his heels. In order to not harm his cargo any more than it already was, he could not resort to the demonic chakra in his system in order to recharge his reserves. He could not hand her to others, due to the simple fact that most of them were injured as it was, with Guan being in the best of shape out of the entire group, having just received a few burns on his left arm, whereas Kakashi had, on 2 occasions, already required support from some of the Chunin that were in better shape in order to keep up and not fall behind. On the plus side, however, he could tell they were nearly approaching the border between Kumo and Konoha, one marked by the Kusai-Garuja Bridge, a great wooden bridge which was nearly 50 yards from one end to the other. If they could just pass that bridge, they could destroy it and cut off this pursuit. Naruto leapt off of another 3 when Guan caught up to him. "My lord, we are approaching the bridge that marks the border. We must be careful. This Suga Liang may have prepared something for us, knowing that this was the quickest and easiest escape route." Naruto nodded as he glanced around, taking in the lush, heavy vegetation around them, as well as the darkened shadows cast by the large trees. He stared ahead, finding the bridge already in sight and rapidly approaching. "Well, I do admit this would be a good place for an ambush." Almost as if waiting for the blonde word, a kunai flew from the shadows of the forest, striking one of the Chunin directly behind him. This was soon followed by hundreds of others. Naruto and Guan skidded to a halt, the blonde growling as he caught one of the kunai and threw it back, watching as one of the men fell from his tree, crashing onto the floor with a dull thud. "It's an ambush, all right," Guan remarked as he used his sword to block some of the kunai. A surge of chakra behind them, however, had Naruto turning to face the cause of it. The Jinchuriki found it was a lightning, headed straight for Guan's exposed back. The large man still had not realized it, being distracted by some, now charging Kumo-nin. His legs moved, seemingly of their own accord, as he rushed and shoved the man away, using his body weight and momentum to tackle him to the ground. It proved to be at his own expense, however, as the lightning tore through the left side of his stomach, the smell of burnt flesh permeating the air a moment later as the leader of Konoha roared in what could only be described as agony, falling to one knee as he made sure to do his best to not jostle Temari, who was still on his shoulder, but thankfully had not been hit by the attack. "My lord!" Guan yelled in alarm as he moved in front of Naruto to shield him from the Kumo ninja now approaching them, Kakashi and the rest of the surviving Konoha ninja circling the blonde as they joined in the attempt to protect him. Guan glanced back at Naruto, watching him visibly struggle to pick himself up after the debilitating attack, blood flowing down from the wound to his leg, the smell of it thick in the air. Guan, despite his loyalty to the younger man, would have never, ever believed that he would willingly take a hit for him, especially one as grievous as the one he had currently taken. Guan's eyes narrowed in contemplation for a moment before they hardened in determination. "Naruto-sama, Kakashi-san, leave this place. I and the rest of the men shall take control of the rear for now. We will join you once we are done here." Naruto growled, ignoring the coppery taste of his own blood as he rose fully to his feet. "I cannot ask you to do that." "Neither can I," Kakashi added as he blocked another kunai. "My lord, please. Aside from myself and Jiraiya-sama, Kakashi is one of your strongest generals. He is too injured to be of much use here. Both of you go." Guan spoke before he cut down one of the Cumin and that got too close too quickly. "You must leave." He paused before he looked at him, his gaze serious and holding a smoldering flame of determination within them. "Who else among us can quell this rebellion if you fall here?" Naruto stared at the larger man, his eyes momentarily going to the floor as something that could be interpreted as remorse passed over his eyes before they hardened, the familiar glint of ruthlessness entering his red eyes before he nodded once. Guan nodded back. "Men!" he roared, bringing the attention of the gathered ninja to him. "We must cut a path to the bridge, protect our lord and let none pass the bridge once he crosses." For a brief, very brief moment there was a silence that passed through all of the injured Konoha ninja, one which allowed them to fully appreciate the graveness of their situation. The realization that this day, more likely than not, marked their deaths, fully settled within their minds. But the moment vanished, and the slow feeling of dread seeping into their spines vanished, replaced by cold determination. Their nations had not come this far, and surpassed so many obstacles, both military, political, and civil, to simply allow it all to fall apart now. They would defend their commander, they would protect the promise of peace he offered. They would protect the dream that had been offered to them, to the lives of their children. And so, with a great roar, the men pushed forward, cutting down any ninja that stood in their path until they themselves were cut down, using their own bodies as human shields to defend the one in the center. Finally, having crossed the several dozen yards, which seemed more like several hundred yards when they arrived, they made it to the bridge, opening up their formation and allowing Naruto and Kakashi to get onto the bridge. "Go!" Guan yelled before he turned back around, his sword in hand as the remaining ninja did the same. Naruto closed his eyes and paused for a moment, his free arms still gripping his injury as he turned and he stared at Guan before he turned back to Kakashi. "Come, let us not make his sacrifice worthless." Kakashi nodded and together they began making their way across the bridge, leaving the one-eyed swordsman of Kiri to hold off Kumo for as long as he could, knowing that today would more likely than not signify his death. "Konoha ninja!" A female voice reached their ears, bringing all the ninjas' attention onto the owner, finding a woman with shoulder-length soft brown hair staring down at them, a hook-end spear held in one hand. "Surrender now, and your lives will be spared." Guan made his way through his men, coming to a stop in front of them, and facing the 50 or so Kumo jounins, outnumbering the remaining dozen at least 5 to 1. He responded, "Not one of you shall pass this bridge." He passed his eyes over the assembled enemies before he placed himself into a stance. "Those that dare shall meet death." Zhuge Liang currently made his way through the forest, the Kazakai at his side, the boy's anger and fear were an almost palpable thing, sand whipping around him as he practically tore the forest apart in his pursuit of the Konoha Jinchuriki. One thing he could be fairly certain of was that, in his arrogance, Naruto most likely would not have soldier pills on him, not that he would need it under most circumstances. But these aren't most circumstances. Without soldier pills, he would resort to his demonic chakra. Liang had not sensed him resorting to such, however. The Reikage absolutely refused to believe that anyone, not even the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, could possibly hold such large reserves, so that meant there was only one other alternative, that he simply wasn't using it. Again, only two reasons came to mind: either he had used too much of it already in the battle, which he seriously doubted, seeing as how he had only sensed a surge of Kyuubi's chakra that did not come from Akina for just a few minutes, or he wasn't using it because he could not do so because of Temari. He was willing to bet on the latter. This would prove to be a great advantage soon. Once Naruto was ambushed, which had been suggested by his wife, he would be stalled long enough for both himself and the Kazekage to catch up. With both of them there, as well as the 60 or so Anbu in the ambush, not to mention the rest of the Anbu that would no doubt be coming right behind them, hopefully with Akina, he doubted even Naruto would be able to survive all of that. Still, his thoughts drifted to Temari. He needed to get her back from Naruto. Dead or alive, it didn't matter to him, but he had to make sure that the blonde did not use her to force Suna into a surrender. No matter what. The world will never know peace under Uzumaki Naruto. He could not be the leader of the world due to his cruelty, his omnipotence. The people needed a leader who was human, who made mistakes, someone they, on at least some level, could relate to. Uzumaki Naruto was not a human being that could be related to, understood, perhaps even pitied, but never related to. A surge of chakra ahead of him alerted him to the fact that the ambush had already begun, and so, with his own chakra pumping down his legs, he pushed himself forward. His wife was there after all, he wouldn't leave her to fight Naruto on her own. Not far behind the two, Akina was rushing through the trees. The medic that had treated her back at the city had done well, her fatigue from the previous fight all but gone now. She was following the various sense and chakra presences. She recalled her fight with Naruto, whereas before, her mind had been clouded with her emotions. Now she could look back on it, her mind clearer, no longer clouded by the anger that came with seeing him. The words they had spoken to each other returned to her mind with clarity, allowing her to reflect on both her words and his. Yes, I would see 100 cities destroyed if it meant seeing your corpse at my feet. Had she truly said that? Had she allowed her hatred for the man that had killed her parents reach to such heights that it would consume her to such a degree? Then tell me, dear sister, how does that make you any different from me? How could she hold such hatred, such blind and untamed hatred, and claim to be different from him? How many had told her to let go of her anger? Yajuto, Tsunade, Shizen, Lady Ing. How many people had told her to stop fighting solely for her revenge? She couldn't remember, but she knew it had been many. She had ignored them all, selfishly, ignorantly, arrogantly. She shook her head. She knew that their advice was one that she should follow, but just the thought of that monster, the same one that had so callously killed off her entire family, and the family of countless others at night 10 years ago, made her blood boil horribly. She shook her head, pushing the thought from her mind. But soon, it was replaced by another thought. One which centered around how he referred to her during their, admittedly short exchange. Sister. At first, she had believed him to have called her that because they both shared the fact that they were Jinchuriki to the Kyuubi no Kitsune. But every time he said it, it seemed different somehow, as if he was truly calling her sister. She didn't know how she could tell, but she could. And then that question. You mean you truly don't know then? It was as if he was speaking to himself more than to her. She had heard it though. She paused, coming to a dead stop mid-run as the sudden thought came unbidden to her mind. Could he? No. She shook her head again. No. That just couldn't be. She refused to believe such a thing. Focus! She chastised herself as she shook her head again. No, he has sharpened senses just like I do. He was toying with me. The cruel bastard's just trying to mess with my head. She convinced herself as she clenched her fist, taking hold of her anger and forcibly bringing it to the surface as she pushed that horrifying thought from her mind. Taking hold of her anger, she took back to the pursuit again, attempting to keep hold of it as best she could as she drew closer and closer, feeling the new chakra outputs in front of her. But that feeling, that nagging little feeling at the back of her mind would not leave her mind, no matter how much she tried to shove it away, it remained. Meanwhile at the bridge, the Konoha ninja, though they fought bravely, were slowly but surely being overpowered by the well-rested and less injured Kumonins. It was a miracle they had lasted as long as they did. Only about 6 remained, including Guan, who was fighting Yu-ing near the bridge. Guan's sword clashed with Kumo Kunoichi's hook spear, blocking it with a firm hold over his own blade. He moved to shove her off when he twisted her weapon, so it was locked firmly onto his own blade, which she then used as a form of pivot point, lifting herself upwards, in a motion akin to a pole vault as she flipped over Guan, landing behind him as she released her spear from the grip it held over his own sword during mid-vault, now allowing her to deliver another swing to his exposed back. Only for the man to pivot around on his heel, quick enough to bat away the strike and counter with his own swing aimed at her legs, only for her to block said strike by lowering the counterweight end of her spear enough to do so, pushing the strike over herself as she ducked, sliding on her knees in a spin as she delivered her own strike to his legs, only for the large swordsman to somersault over her, in a sideways motion before he swung down towards her while in mid-flip. Ing rolled forward before turning back around, her spear charged with lightning chakra before she stabbed it into the ground. She released 2 scrolls from her sleeves, allowing them to roll open and fall to the floor before she formed her hand seals. Nin Fuan, Rokuparism no. Seals glowed from the scrolls, spreading outwards in the form of a 6-pointed star, electricity tearing the earth open as it rose from the soil itself. Thinking quickly, Guan, before he hit the ground, plunged the sword into the earth. Due to the fact the handle was wrapped in a combination of leather and rubber, the lightning did not reach him as he stood on the handle of the weapon. He did not stand there long, as he leapt off the blade and landed on the bridge behind Yu-ing. The woman snapped her head behind herself, and barely managed to catch sight of Guan. The man was kneeling slightly as he seemingly yanked something towards himself. It only took her a moment to realize what that was, and in the next she had already leapt up into the air, narrowly avoiding Guan's blade as the man had pulled it towards himself with chakra strings from his left hand. She failed, however, to pay close attention to the position of his other hand. Guan had been kneeling, with his right hand touching the ground as his feet stood on the bridge. Chakra seeped into the soil from the contact, as he had completed his hand seals for the technique when he had leapt from the blade to the bridge. It was because of this that the woman was caught completely by surprise when a large mud dragon rose up from the earth next to her. Snapping her attention towards it, she saw the beast roar before it lunged at her. She charged her weapon with lightning, feeling it tingle beneath her fingertips as electricity coruscated over it. With a small cry, she launched her weapon, throwing it like a straight spear, watching as it drilled through the creature of earth, rock and clay like a bottle opener through a cork. When she landed, however, instead of falling onto hard granite, she came in contact with slick mud that easily made her stumble and fall onto her side. She lifted herself up onto her hands and knees, feeling the mud weigh her down as she did so. "What is dash?" A groan to her side caught her attention, and with several loud snaps and cracks the tree to her immediate right began to topple right over her. Reflex, and adrenaline kicking in, the woman managed to roll forward, but with the mud weighing her down and hampering her progress, she was not able to escape entirely, and the great mass of wood fell directly on top of both legs, the snapping of several bones audible to her ears even through the great crash of the tree. Blinding pain tore through the woman, and a scream of agony was ripped from her throat as her eyes rolled into the back of her head, darkness creeping along her vision as she passed out due to the pain. Collapsing as her strength left her completely, her breathing coming out in quick, painful heaves as she felt her vision blurred and lose focus. Guan rushed her then, his sword dragging behind him slightly as he made his way towards the woman. As he lifted the blade above his head, bringing it down to remove her head with the massive weapon, a white blur came between them, and crimson soon splashed his face as it cut open the flesh of another. As he looked down, he found the form of the Raikage holding off his blade as best he could with one kunai, the sword digging deep into his shoulder. A grunt of pain escaped Liang's gritted teeth as he glared up at the swordsman of Kiri, a wind blade forming around his free hand before he moved to plunge it into his chest. Guan, seeing the attack coming, moved to leap back, but before he could, he felt another blade enter through his back, followed by another from his side, and 2 more, one at a downward angle into his collarbone, and another piercing his shoulder blade, not to mention Liang's own wind blade going in through his ribs. Coughing up blood, the one-eyed swordsman staggered as strength was seemingly sapped from his legs, his vision turning red as the sound of his fading heartbeat steadily came slower and slower to the man's ears. As one, the Reikage and the Umbu pulled their blades free of his flesh, allowing the man to fall onto his knees. Liang didn't waste any time on examining the swordsman as he turned to the form of his injured wife, a trace of panic entering his normally calm eyes and bland voice. "Yuang In, can you hear me? Get the medics now!" He roared to the Umbu that had gathered around him, who quickly nodded before they went to find said individuals. Liang's hands shook with uncertainty as he looked upon his wife's unconscious body. He was never a man to display any amount of emotions, but at the sight of her laying there, in the mud, a pained expression on her face, he truly felt a sliver of fear enter his being for the first time in many, many years. Guan felt his eyelids grow heavy with tiredness, darkness creeping along his vision. But he still managed to look upon the bridge. He saw, in the distance, the man he knew to be the Kazekage had now crossed the bridge and was continuing his pursuit of Naruto. The bridge. It was a mystery to the swordsman what drove him to movement, whether it was sheer willpower, or some other worldly force, that caused him to stagger slowly to his feet, blood escaping his lips as it stained his clothes and beard. He felt, and heard many of the Kumo Umbu draw their blades, poised to attack him at a moment's notice. Slowly, the swordsman staggered to the edge of the bridge, stumbling as he went. Through pain and blurred vision, somehow the swordsman managed to make his way to the start of the bridge, gazing into the horizon where he could see the Kazekage's form beginning to vanish. Liang, who had been watching the swordsman cautiously, managed to sense his gathering of chakra a moment too late. "Stop him!" he roared, and in seconds, his Umbu rushed the man, but it was too little, too late. Guan raised his head to the heavens, releasing a great cry of his own as he spread his arms out wide at his sides before he brought them down to his feet, slamming them against the ground at his feet, and with an expulsion of chakra, the earth loosened beneath the foundations. It was no secret Kumo had been the one to create this structure. The foundations and reinforcements were stronger on this side and held up most of the weight. With the loss of its primary support, Guan smiled as he watched the wood crumble away, feeling the coldness of steel slicing through his flesh, a moment later. This time, Kumo Umbu made certain to finish the job. "Hidetada, I may not have been able to bring about your dream, brother, but perhaps, with my sacrifice, I have helped it come closer to its fruition." And so, with that final thought, the one-eyed swordsman of Kiri's life was extinguished. Kakashi was currently running top speed through the descending forest area. They had been running as fast as they could, but still, they could feel each of the friendly chakra signatures as it was snuffed out, the feeling of Guan, ever the stalwart, being the last to vanish. But Kakashi did not have much time to dwell on his comrade from Kiri, for the sound of a grunt and shifting gravel behind him had him turning to find sight of the injured Naruto once again on one knee, breathing somewhat heavily, and using one hand for support. "Naruto!" he called worriedly as he made his way to the blonde's side, finding the wound from the lightning technique was still bleeding, though less than it had been before. "Why haven't you fully healed yet? I've seen you recover from injuries almost as bad as this in seconds." Naruto stood up again, growling as he shook away the blurriness in his vision. "The girl cannot survive any exposure to the fox's chakra in her state. She needs to be alive more than dead." "Well, let me carry her then, that way you can heal yourself," Kakashi offered, moving to grab Suna Kunoichi. "No," Naruto said as he began walking forward again. "We are miles away from the nearest border patrol. As it is, you will have difficulty reaching our patrols with your injuries. If you place an additional burden on them, you won't make it at all." Kakashi shook his head. "Forget about me. If you die, then all this has been for nothing. Give the girl to me, heal yourself, and once you're done, I'll give her back, eh?" Naruto stared at Kakashi for a moment before he nodded his consent and handed the girl to the older man, ignoring his wince of pain as he released another of the seals on his wrists, feeling the familiar burn of Kyuubi's chakra for the second time in 2 days. "Come, we must keep moving lest the pursuit catches up to you. Dash!" Crash! Naruto and Kakashi snapped their heads behind them, finding that, currently smashing through 4 of 5 trees in a lunge straight for his Konoha counterpart was Gaara, his eyes alight with fury as he stared upon the 2 men that had taken his sister. Naruto only had a scant few seconds to spare to brace himself before Gaara smashed into him, tackling him through nearly a dozen trees and several yards of rock before the 2 of them came to a stop at the edge of an ankle-deep river, the precipice of a waterfall and the edge of the cliff not too far off, the edge covered in river stones that dug into Naruto's back as he skidded along the surface. Growling, the blonde pressed both legs to Gaara's chest before he threw the Kazekage off, smashing him against a tree before he got to his feet. Forming several hand seals, he breathed out a great fire dragon towards the Kazekage, only for a pillar of sand to meet it. Naruto grunted before he looked at Kakashi, who still held Temari over his shoulder but had given them a wide berth. Go Kakashi, I will deal with him shortly and join you. Boo-dash! Kakashi began but stopped before he nodded and ran, Temari still over his shoulder. If he stayed here he'd more than likely be a hindrance rather than an asset. Besides, if anyone could get out of this then it was Naruto. No! Gaara roared at the retreating man's back before he unleashed another pillar of sand towards him, only for the attack to be intercepted by hundreds of wind blades which cut the sand apart, making them little grains that Gaara couldn't reform before Kakashi vanished into the trees. But Gaara was undeterred. Leaping high into the air, he formed his sand platform beneath him, ready to pursue when Naruto lunged at him from below, but the red chakra around him gave his intent away, and in his slightly injured state Gaara was more than fast enough to form another clump of sand that slammed right into Naruto's side, right over the spot he was injured. Another roar was heard as Naruto was thrown aside, slamming into the river floor with damn near bone-crushing force. Growling low in his throat, Jinchuriki's eyes flashed red. Very well, he thought before he took some more of his blood and wiped it over the second seal on his wrists. The ensuing explosion of red chakra seemed to shift the very atmosphere around them. The water currently coming in contact with the Konoha Jinchuriki bubbled and boiled as the injury at his side finally closed up with a hiss as the red chakra literally boiled off the burnt flesh that had been hampering his healing. Gaara grunted and was unable to control the sand platform for very long after due to the fact that the heat had turned it into glass. Falling back to the river, Gaara himself released a growl low in his throat as he glared at Naruto's back, a tail of sand beginning to form behind him as his eyes shifted in color. Naruto had defeated him once before when they were younger, and by all accounts was far beyond his league. But for Gaara, much more was on the line than just his life. The moment Naruto had threatened his sister and harmed his brother, this became far more than just him. And by God, if he did not defeat the Konoha Jinchuriki here today, then he would put him in such a state that a genin could do it instead. Naruto straightened slowly, his body adapting once again to the feel of 2 taels worth of chakra. He could feel the power coursing through his veins. With this power, he had to make this quick, very quick. He had managed to train his body over the last decade to withstand more and more of the fox's chakra for longer periods of time. He could withstand 1 tael of the demon's raw yuki for nearly half an hour. 2 taels of the beast he could withstand for nearly 10 minutes before it began damaging him. 3 taels worth was no less than 3. And he had never gone so far as to use 4 taels of the demon's raw yuki. Still, as he straightened and turned to face his opponent, eyes that bled into crimson fogs clashing with diamond gold, he determined that even in his injured and tired state, 2 taels would be more than enough to defeat him in 10 minutes. Drawing his 2 blades, the Devil King took his stance. Oh yes, more than enough. When Akina arrived at the gorge that marked the border of Konoha and Kumo, she couldn't stop the startled gasp from escaping her throat. Lady Wang! She cried before she leapt down, landing at the now freed woman's side. The log having been cut by several wind jutsu, Liang knelt at her side, his features as impassive as he could hold them, his normally impeccable clothing matted with dried mud and blood. He was holding Ying's hand in his own, a tender gesture of affection she never would have thought she would have the privilege of seeing from her master towards his wife. Still, her thoughts on her master's tenderness towards his wife left her as she looked to the medics. What happened? She questioned with an obvious tone of worry and a hint of anger in her voice. The medic shook his head. That damn Konoha bastard cut the tree and made it fall on her, damn near broke every bone in her legs, several times over. He added as an afterthought as he looked to the fallen Kiri swordsman who still lay face down in the dirt at the edge of the gorge with a sneer on his face. Fucking bastard! He snarled. Akina! Liang's gravely voice, heavy with emotion which was held carefully close to himself, reached her ears, bringing her eyes up to him as he reluctantly took his hand away from his wives, standing to his full height. Return to the village, tell them to gather every earth-based ninjutsu specialist that's not injured or dead and bring them here. We need a bridge across this gorge. Akina looked across the nearly 150-foot expanse that separated them. There was no way any ninja could throw that far to launch a wire or swords, and there was no way humanly possible that any one of them could jump this expanse. She was about to speak when 2 great flares of chakra which she easily recognized as demonic Yuki passed over them like a great shockwave, forcing many of the men to brace themselves lest they lose their footing. Her eyes widened at the familiarity of the chakra, before she became aware of the other. You mean you truly don't know then? Naruto's words again went through her mind, the confusing thoughts returning tenfold, as if magnified with his presence alone. The Kazekage. Liang muttered to himself with narrowed eyes. We have to help him. Akina spoke as she turned to look at him. But Liang merely glanced at her and replied before he shook his head. From here, there's nothing that we can do. Before he turned to walk back to his wife, moving to leave his shocked student behind. But sensei, he'll get killed. She spoke as she gripped the sleeve of his robe with a firm hold, bringing the man to a halt. Liang didn't move for a moment before he turned back to her. They stared into each other's eyes, dark, apathetic brown clashing with a pleading blue. As I said, there's nothing we can do, he said before pulling himself free of her grip and making his way back to his wife. Akina bit her lip for a moment, staring at the steadily reddening horizon with a look of hesitation about her. However, when a second wave of Yuki washed over her, she made her decision. Walking back a few feet, the young girl took a deep breath. Zhuge Liang, as if sensing the sudden change in his student, turned, and at the sight of her determined, filled gaze knew what she was going to attempt. No, don't! But his words fell on deaf ears as the girl ran forward, chakra flowing down her legs and pushing her forward until she reached the very edge of the cliff and gave a single powerful leap. Liang skidded to a halt at the edge and watched in mild frustration as red chakra bubbled from the girl's arms before it shot forward, extending like claws that dug deeply into the trees on the other side which she used to pull herself up. She offered one last, slightly apologetic glance towards him before she turned and ran towards the Yuki. Liang mentally cursed Gaara. He could afford to lose. Suna would almost certainly rise in retaliation to such an act. Akina, however, could not. Though by herself, she had proven to have no chance of defeating the Devil King, she had proven to be able to go at least toe-to-toe with him in a fight for a while at least, which is more than most could claim. With Yujito at her side, those chances of victory were raised. But one without the other would undoubtedly fail. Cursing again, he turned to his messengers. We need a bridge across this gorge now. Knowing that their lord was not one to ever raise his voice spurred the messengers to run faster as they made their way back to Kumo. Liang looked to the horizon once again, darkened ever more by the rising levels of Yuki. Kakashi stumbled as he nearly lost his footing running through the trees, pain throbbing from the point of his injury and spreading out like red-hot wire being pulled through his whole body, legs burning with pain as he tried to continue putting one leg in front of the other. His vision was getting blurry, exhaustion beginning to settle in as blood loss took its toll. No, Kakashi shook his head. I can't fail. Guan and Naruto placed their trust in me, he thought as he swallowed heavily, ignoring the coppery taste of his own blood as it coated the inside of his mouth. He stared at his feet. Come on, just one foot, in front of the other, come on. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. As he continued his mantra, Kakashi continued to trudge along the forest, each step feeling as if he was dragging a 20-pound weight on his ankles. Lady, the first thing I'm gonna do when I get back is put your ass on a diet. His thoughts ended, however, as footsteps sounded to his right. Tensing as he drew a kunai, Kakashi placed his back to a tree. There's no way, I can still feel Naruto's chakra. Did they manage to get past him? His worries proved to be for nothing, however, as a hesitant voice reached him. Kakashi? It was with great relief that he met the face of his longtime friend Guy. The green-wearing ninja held a look of worry. At his sides were the visibly confused forms of Kidamaru and Taiyuya. Guy, Kakashi said, swallowing again before he spoke. This is a prisoner we've captured. It's a long story, and I'll tell you later, but right now, we have to get this girl back to Konoha. She can't fall into enemy hands. He groaned as he fell to one knee, adrenaline beginning to die down as he relaxed at the sight of his comrades. Guy stepped forward and held him up by his arm. All right, give her to me, Guy said. Kakashi was about to do so but paused, before he slowly lifted his hitaiite and looked upon them with the newly exposed Sharingan. Making sure it wasn't a henge, he spoke. Why are you out here? I thought the patrols wouldn't be for another 3 miles. Guy shook his head. Jiraiya-sama ordered us and a few others out here, said something about a bad feeling. I'm glad he did by the looks of things. Kakashi nodded as he handed Temari to Guy, watching as the man carried her bridal style as he turned to face Kidomaru. "All right," he addressed the arachnid shinobi. "Signal the medics, tell them to be ready for 2 injured. I'll lead Kakashi there, you two go and assist Naruto-sama." Nodding, the 2 former sound ninja vanished, heading towards where they felt the waves of Yuki. A great roar tore through the air of the creek, fires rising high into the air in the form of a great dragon, the flames spreading out into nearby trees as the beast pursued its target, the Kazekage. Gaara skidded to a halt, pivoting back on his heel before he leapt back, the dragon still following him. Sand gathered around his arm as he thrust it forward, a great pillar forming and smashing into the beast. Glass quickly formed under the sheer heat. Before the flames were smothered by the sand, the billions of tiny grains continuing on their path to the other Jinchuriki. There was a crash as the pillar of sand hit its target, only for it to be blown apart, filling the air with the tiny particles as Naruto exploded forth from it, red chakra trailing behind him as he lunged for the Kazekage. With more sand quickly forming along his arms to act as armor, Gaara raised both to block the downward sword swing. Almost as if a shockwave went off, he was pushed down, back to the river with nearly mind-numbing force. He could feel the bones in his legs straining in protest to the pressure placed on them. But he ignored it, his eyes darting back up to the descending Kage. A single scimitar in one hand, he released a feral growl. "Soon a shuriken!" he roared as hundreds of said weapons formed from his sand around him and were subsequently launched towards the Konoha Jinchuriki. Naruto's sword moved with speed, seemingly inconceivable for such a weapon, slicing and cutting through the sands with his wind-empowered blade, stopping them each in their tracks before he extended his hand once again, a massive burst of flames straight down, watching as they hit the river, steam rising in great clouds as the torrent of flames continued to fall, Gaara vanishing within their orange glow. As Naruto stopped his attack, he landed on the boiling water, making sure to keep his feet above the water as he waited for the steam to clear. As it did, he found a single, large orb of rough glass in the middle of the river, glimmering in the sunlight. Naruto raised his blade, ready to launch a torrent of wind blades towards the glass sphere. Before he could, however, several strange clumping sounds reached his ears behind him. Spinning around, he didn't have much time to react before a spike of wet sand rose up from the river. Realizing that Gaara had used the river as a means of hiding his sand, Naruto did the best he could to brace himself before the sand slammed into him, smashing him against the tree as it held him to the wood with a vice-like grip. Grunting in pain, the ninja visibly struggled against his bonds. Shattering the sphere of glass, Gaara appeared, tail twitching behind him as he growled, his fist half clenched as he held it towards Naruto. Their eyes met for the briefest of instances, the next when Gaara closed his fist, watching as the tree was crushed beneath the pressure, blood exploding from Naruto's form. But the very next instant, something slammed into his back, and pain unlike any he had known tore through his body, blood rising from his throat and into his mouth, spilling from his lips as his hands clenched and unclenched spasmodically, his vision darkening as he started to pass out. Numbly he felt another impact at his back, a force he recognized as that of an explosion. Earth met sky as he was launched forward, his eyes rolling into the back of his head as darkness claimed him. Naruto breathed heavily, his palms smoking slightly as the Rasengan he'd used dissipated the red chakra flowing back into the seals as he willed them to reform. It had been a long time indeed since he had been pushed like this. He straightened, ready to take his leave when a sound slightly to his left caught his attention. Turning his head, he managed to catch sight of what may have been the last, or at least second to last person he would want to see at this point. Growling low in his throat, Naruto turned to face her fully. Akina took a moment to catch her breath before she leapt down into the river, listening to the splash of water and feeling the cold wetness invade her shoes as she allowed herself to fall into it. Brandishing her three-piece staff as she took her stance, watching as he drew his second blade and did the same. The two of them began to circle each other. Akina took in his appearance, slightly torn clothing, his breathing much heavier than she remembered it, and the smell of blood, his blood apparently, as it carried his scent hanging thick in the air around him, gave away his exhausted state, despite his admittedly imposing appearance. Though she felt the familiar feelings of anger and resentment bubbling up to the surface, his echoing words pierced the hazing veil. "You mean you truly don't know then?" She shook her head, closing her eyes for a moment, as she took a deep calming breath before she opened them again, sky blue meeting bleeding crimson. "What did you mean back in the city, when you asked you truly don't know?" Naruto's head turned skyward as the sound of rumbling thunder gathered above him, light gray clouds beginning to gather, as he could begin to hear the approaching rain. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "Fool girl," he spoke after a moment as his eyes snapped open, red chakra once again exploding from his form, causing Akina to have to brace herself against the assault that threatened to throw her back. Grunting in pain as a mass of the reddish chakra with no real form smashed against her, pushing her until it slammed her against a tree, holding her there as it tightened to the point of near suffocation. The burn was harsh against her skin, but not nearly as much as it would have been on another and used to the feeling. Naruto ignored his own pain by calling on the red chakra once again. He was approaching his limit, but he still had more than enough to use against her. Willing the hold of the red mass to tighten, he watched as her mouth opened in a silent scream of pain with the utmost apathy, before another wave of pain seemed to wash over him, this one, nearly double the intensity of the others, causing him to grunt in pain before another image of the nine tails flashed through his mind's eye. Accursed Kitsune. He snarled as yet another wave of pain hit him. Akina was not sure what happened. She could feel the hold of the red chakra tightening around her to the point where she couldn't breathe. Even the scream she attempted to muster from her throat was silent, as her lungs could not muster the strength to produce it. A moment later, however, the strength behind the thing wavered and she managed to take in much needed air. Opening her eyes, she managed to catch sight of Naruto staggering slightly, his form slightly hunched and his arms shaking as they held up the blades, his pain no longer hidden as his breaths came in deep shuddering heaves. As if willed by some unseen force, her previously abated rage and anger returned tenfold, a soft voice whispering in the back of her mind, reminding her of everything he had done. All the deaths he had caused, all the lives he had taken, all the suffering he had caused, how he so callously cut down all others as if they were nothing more than roaches at his feet. Whispering in her ear, telling her to call upon the power within her. Bloodlust and the thrill of the fight was all her mind recognized as she snarled and felt her own portion of Kyuubi's chakra rising forth, almost of its own accord. The tree behind her sizzled and blackened with heat, the smell of smoke and fire mixing with that of the blood, her own eyes bleeding into crimson as she met Naruto's, who looked upon her, as he felt her powers come forth and begin to press against his own. First one tail, then two, and finally the third rising from her tailbone as she snarled, the two chakras beginning to push against one another, and with a roar, Akina broke free of the hold, dispersing Naruto's chakra before she rushed him. Naruto took his stance, placing the blades in front of him, but it proved to be for nothing as the younger of the two siblings slashed at them with her claws, the force of it shattering both blades into hundreds of metal shards. Throwing the hilts away, Naruto caught her wrist as she slashed at him, before he delivered a punch followed by an immediate elbow to her face with the same arm. Akina snarled, retaliating with a slash with her free arm, tearing off chunks of visibly burnt flesh from the Jinchuriki's chest. Naruto grunted, twisting the wrist held in his hand with savage force, feeling and hearing the sickening snap that signified the girl's now broken appendage. Akina seemed to give no mind to the injury, however, slashing again with her hand. She was blocked this time again by Naruto's free arm. Raising herself up a bit higher, she struck back with a savage display as she bit down into the man's arm. Naruto snarled in pain as she tore off a chunk with her teeth, tendons and muscles ripping and snapping as they were torn away. Naruto molded the chakra in the back of his throat, willing the last vestiges of the fox's chakra to mold properly as he blew out a great gout of flame through his mask, the flames exploding point-blank range in Akina's face, the girl barely able to do much more than look shocked before the flames consumed her. Naruto released her, never stopping his attack as he did so. Finally, after nearly a full 30 seconds, the attack finally dissipated, revealing more steam as much of the water had been evaporated by the flames. Trees along the riverbank caught aflame or already turned to ashes. Naruto breathed heavily, the red chakra around him losing its intensity as he called it back. Finally, when the steam cleared, it revealed the three-tailed Akina, burns rapidly healing themselves on her skin as she too breathed heavily from the immense pain she must have been feeling. The bone in her arm snapping back into place before mending together properly. Naruto growled low in his throat, but before he could make much of a move against the girl, something exploded from the ground directly in front of him. Instinct and reflexes kicked in as he guessed the trajectory of the incoming attack, raising his hand to block it, only for the weapon to pierce said hand and still manage to dig deep into his shoulder. Upon closer inspection, he found the weapon to be Akina's three-piece staff, crackling with lightning chakra. He saw the girl form a quick series of hand signs before she slammed her hands into the river, her feet rising above the water level as she pushed chakra into them to keep them above the surface, molding it carefully so she could stand at least a few extra centimeters off of it. Naruto knew what was coming, but couldn't react to it in time, and in seconds, blinding pain ripped through him as hundreds of volts of lightning coursed through the water he was currently standing ankle-deep in, as well as the metal staff currently impaling him. A roar of agony pried from his throat as his eyes flashed blue before they returned to crimson. A feeling of anger unknown to him since Sarutobi's death bubbling up from his chest as red chakra once again gathered around him. "Enough!" was the roar that tore through the river before another burst of red chakra, this one nearly 3 times as intense as the first one against Gaara. The water at his feet bubbled and hissed before it evaporated completely, the shockwave knocking Akina off her feet, stopping her technique and slamming her head against the stones of the river as the red chakra washed over her. The impact knocking her into a daze, the red chakra receding back into the seal as the edges of her vision darkened for a brief moment. Akina staggered for a moment as she got to her feet, her world spinning as her head throbbed from the impact. She shook her head to clear the cobwebs, but soon another kick connected with her face, sending her falling to the flowing stream rushing beneath her. The cold water and stones barely registered in her mind as she sputtered and tried to get back to her feet. The smooth river stones resting beneath, however, shifted, causing her to trip again, falling back into the water before she could even get to her knees. Naruto stalked forward, his eyes alight with fury as he snapped her weapon in two and tossed it aside, letting it splash into the water at his feet without a second glance, never once pausing in his stride. He reached down, savagely grabbed his sister's throat, taking a sick satisfaction in hearing the back of her head smack against the stones beneath the surface. She clutched onto his wrist, her claws furiously trying to tear him off but not being able to pierce the tempered steel of his gauntlets. Roughly dragging her by her throat across the stream, he stepped onto the edge of the precipice before yanking her upwards, holding her firmly, even as she struggled and thrashed in his grip. Akina felt his hand tighten around her throat. She couldn't breathe, and if he continued like this he would crush her windpipe. Her eyes opened slowly, spots forming over her vision as she began to black out. But even with the approaching darkness she could see hatred. A deep burning hatred within the hellish red eyes that glared into her own. She could feel his rage. It was almost palpable in its intensity, and for a moment she could swear she was looking into a mirror. She gave one last attempt at retaliation and began gathering as much of Kyuubi's chakra into her arm as she could. Naruto allowed his attention to drift from her face down to her arm where the red haze was beginning to form. "Enough of this," he snarled as he formed his own attack. "The Rasengan, our father's technique," he thought with a somewhat ironic feeling overtaking him. "How fitting that this technique is the one I will use to kill you, dear sister." The spinning ball of chakra pulsed and glowed a piercing blue, a stark contrast to the blood-red robe and glowing red eyes. As he reared his arm back, preparing to deliver the death blow, a sound to his right startled him. Snapping to the direction the sound came from, he was greeted by the sight of a sand pillar headed straight for him as Gaara had regained consciousness. Not having enough time to move out of the way, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki spared one last glance at his suffocating sibling before releasing her from his grip, allowing her to fall down the cliff he had been holding her over and placing the Rasengan between himself and the incoming attack. With a deafening roar the two attacks met, the flames parted as the power of the Rasengan drove straight through it. The sand pushed hard against the Rasengan, pain began racing up and down his arm as he forced more chakra into the technique, trying to prolong the length of his attack. It placed a strain on his chakra coils using the technique in such a way. But even so his impromptu shield held firm as finally the sands dispersed, and he was greeted by the sight of a panting Gaara, who was clutching his chest where no doubt the damage of the Rasengan was still being felt, blood dripping down his chin, his eyes darting from him to the edge of the precipice where he had dropped Akina without so much as batting an eyelash. His eyes visibly narrowed with cold fury as he stared back upon his red ones. Soon his Yuki again started spiking, rising higher and higher. As he let the Rasengan dissipate, Naruto moved to take a step forward towards the Shikaku's Jinchuriki. Though he was exhausted from his numerous battles today, he was intent on putting the Kage down once and for all. He'd rather avoid killing him, as with his death the chances of Suna's prolonged willingness to fight would increase. Because of Gaara's rising Yuki, however, it was far too late when he felt her presence behind him once again, that accursed presence that brought forth what little emotion he knew. It was a split-second thing. As he moved to turn, he barely took a step when a red, chakra-laced, claw-like arm punched through the right side of his chest. He felt pain, burning, agonizing, clenching pain scorching throughout his entire chest, the feeling of her bloodlust, her rage. His eyes widened as blood exploded from his chest and mouth, accumulating behind his metallic face mask before it was allowed to slowly seep out from the edges. He looked down to where the arm was punching through his chest. Red blood with chunks of flesh and tissue hung from the razor like claws at the end of each finger. His red eyes fading for a brief moment, and returning to his normal blues before flashing back to red, a strangled gurgling growl escaped his throat as he turned his head to look behind him, finding the familiar face of his beloved sister snarling back at him as she twisted the arm currently piercing his chest cavity. He faintly registered Gaara's surprised gasp but paid no attention to it. "Time to end this." She repeated his previous statement before she savagely yanked her arm free, grabbed him by his cloak and threw him over the edge of the cliff. It seemed over. For a moment his body hung in the air, ready to fall to his final resting place. Then Naruto threw a thread of ninja wire which wrapped around her neck. She tried to channel chakra into her feet to keep them firmly upon the ground, but with a shift, the stones along the riverbed went with her, and with a frantic but futile struggle she was dragged over the edge along with him. The howling winds echoed down the mountain where two forms barely recognized it as they continued their titanic struggle. Akina had maneuvered herself to fall faster, and had continued her vicious assault on her injured sibling, the rage once again returning to the forefront of her mind. Naruto could scarcely defend himself as nearly the entire upper right side of his body was utterly useless. Blood rose past her as she fell, the red fluid escaping through his horrendous injury which was struggling to heal. His lung had been thoroughly torn up, bone marrow seeped from his shattered ribs into his bloodstream, tiny bone fragments were littered throughout the hollow wound. It was getting harder. Numbness began creeping along his extremities and he found his own movements sluggish as his vision began to darken and blur. He barely managed to lean back enough to avoid his sister's claw slash. Even so, the claw-like extensions from Kyuubi's chakra stretched outwards, slashing him along his left shoulder, the chakra burn immediately cauterizing the wound. He could see her through the haze. Her rage was taking over. Her smile, it was the same kind of smile he had seen many times on the face of the kitsune. Her eyes flashed, and he knew that the fox was watching him now through her eyes, possibly even controlling her actions. That sick, twisted smile was one of satisfaction in the knowledge that he would soon be free. Naruto growled as anger bubbled in his chest. That blasted kitsune, he was not so weak that he would allow himself to die before his worthless sister. He refused, both the indignity, and granting the fox the satisfaction he so desperately sought. As Akina reared back to take another swipe at him, he struck. Red chakra exploded from his left arm, striking the young girl in the chest and smashing her against the cliff face. Its form was crude in comparison to the claw, merely looking like a red cloud that held her in place against the wall, scrapping her along as they fell, and he struggled to push her harder against its surface. He could see rugged patches of blood trailing behind her. No doubt the jagged rocks had shredded the skin of her back and were currently working on making mincemeat out of the muscle and tissue beneath. His arm burned with pain, and the smell of flesh strong in his nostrils. He saw they were beginning to approach the ground. He struggled to push her even harder against the stone and heard a sickening crunch as her head hit something that was most likely much harder than it. And for a moment everything slowed down, before both their forms slammed against the floor with a sickening thud and cracking sound as bones broke and limbs shattered, their forms bouncing lifelessly. And for Naruto, everything went black. Hours later his eyes snapped open, a strangled gasp escaping his lips, arching his back slightly, causing agonizing pain to rip through his chest. He struggled to breathe. Something was suffocating him, his mask. He visibly struggled to lift up his hand to undo the clasps holding the metallic contraption in place. His fingers shaking as he realized he could barely feel them. Idly he wondered just how much blood he had lost. But banished the thought from his mind as he finally undid the mask and managed to draw in a full, unobstructed breath, letting his hand fall limply to his side as his eyes blurry as they were stared to the sky overhead, burning with orange and purple, indicating that dusk was approaching. His chest heaved as his breaths came in short pants, his vision blurred again before it came back into focus. Was he dying? His memory was fuzzy. He didn't remember how he had gotten here very well. He remembered running. He had been running from something. Then he remembered anger, then pain. His senses prickled and slowly he turned his head to look at whoever he was sensing and found blood-soaked blonde hair, matted down on the head of a young girl. Soon, he remembered who she was and his memory began to clear. His sister. Blood covered her form from head to toe. The grass around her was actually brown because of it. Much of her shirt was torn at the back and she was most certainly unconscious. He looked down to his chest where he remembered she had wounded him very badly and found the gaping hole was still there, but luckily, Kyubi's chakra had saved him. It had cauterized the wound, he wasn't bleeding nearly as much as it would be otherwise. He would survive, at least for now. But he knew that without a team of medics he would most likely not even survive the dusk. He could feel just how hard it was to breathe right now, and the excruciating pain every breath brought him accentuated that. He let his eyes travel up towards Akina again, and wondered if she was still alive. No, he knew she was alive. This one was not one to let death take her so easily. He knew she was alive. He struggled to pick himself up and make his way over to her, but he could barely pick up his own head, let alone drag himself the 15 or so feet between them to kill her. He hated her, and he didn't even know why. But just looking at her brought such a strong emotion of resentment bubbling up from within him. It was confusing, really. She had earned his ire, and she had done nothing but merely exist. Akina groaned, the pain throbbing through her entire form making her rethink her conscious state. Her eyes opened, diluted and hazy as she struggled to regain her bearings. Finally her eyes regained their light and she saw him, she recognized him. Strangely though, the anger that had been clouding her mind only moments before was no longer present. It was still there, but not nearly as intense as it had been. She struggled to lift herself off the floor, a sickening crunch breaking through the silence as her bones finally snapped under the light strain. A scream escaped her lips as fell back to the floor. A silence descended upon the two, broken only by her gasps of pain. Finally, after almost a full minute of this, Naruto began to laugh. It was slow at first. A cold, dry laugh that would unease even the most veteran of ninja. It was the laugh of one that was seemingly long dead, and was merely laughing at the irony that was life. Akina's confusion grew with each of the dry sounds that escaped his lips. Soon, it was followed by annoyance. What the fuck is so funny? Naruto ignored her, however, and ignored the pain in his chest as he continued laughing at some unheard joke. Akina's teeth gritted and soon she wanted nothing more than to stop him. Stop that horrendous laughter that mocked her, taunted her, haunted her dreams. Stop it! She screamed as her chakra flared. Naruto's laughter died down, and he stared back at her, his eyes shining with dark amusement. You and me, dear sister, we are not so different after all. Her eyes stared back into his, unflinchingly as she spoke. Tell me why do you keep calling me your sister? Why did you ask me, if I truly didn't know just what am I supposed to have known? A few chuckles escaped his lips, but it was interrupted as he coughed up blood, letting it trail down his cheek and onto the floor, staining the entire side of his face, but the amusement still remained in his eyes. I wonder, he drawled. How could you be so foolish, or is it perhaps simple ignorance, fool girl? His laughter renewed. What are you talking about? She asked as she struggled to lift herself up again, only to fail, the strength in her remaining arm all but non-existent. Naruto's eyes took on a dark look of satisfaction within them. They really never told you, did they? Ha ha ha, stupid girl, never even bothered to ask questions, I suppose. Did you never even wonder? Never bothered to ask how you were supposedly born on the 15th, 5 days after the Kyubi attack, yet still have a piece of it sealed in you. You're pathetic. Told me what? She questioned, a tone of fear overtaking the pain laced in her voice, the horrifying lines her mind was beginning to draw causing her stomach to lurch. Naruto looked at her from the corner of his eyes. Or perhaps you did question, and they merely told you lies, or evaded your questions entirely, ha ha ha. He looked back to her from the corner of his eye and watched with sick satisfaction as her features shifted from one of confusion to one of slowly dawning horror as she weakly shook her head, her eyes gaining a defiant edge to them. Though Naruto could see that this defense was as weak and pathetic as she was. No, she said as she continued shaking her head. No, it can't be. No, you're the one who killed my parents, we couldn't die. Take a good look at me, dear sister. He chuckled as he interrupted her ramblings, the normally affectionate term released with the hint of venom dripping in his words. Take a good, long look, he repeated, watching as her eyes hesitantly looked back to him, and he watched them fill with tears as she looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time and saw his blue eyes staring straight back at her. Eyes identical to her own. Suddenly her eyes took on an anger as she growled. No, I refuse to believe this. It just isn't possible. This is just another of your tricks. You're a monster? A demon? A murderer? His smile turned somewhat malicious. The only living family you have left? He finished, the cruelty and venom laced in his voice, veiled beneath cold amusement. Dear sister. The last word was a hiss. So insidious and malicious it made her skin crawl. She shook her head again, her form visibly shuddering as cold chills ran up and down her spine. Bile rose into the back of her throat, and the sickening pit formed in her stomach as a strange mixture of cold numbness and gripping pain spread through her chest. No, he's lying, he has to be lying, this just can't be. Naruto's response was to merely laugh. It was long and cruel, vaguely registering in her shocked mind. As Naruto's laughter faded, two forms appeared kneeling at his side. They had seen him just before he fell, but they had never expected to see him in this state. It had become almost inconceivable. Both shinobi held a surprise-induced fear as they looked down on the bloodied form of their leader. "Now Naruto-sama?" Tayuya questioned with audible disbelief in her voice. Tayuya, Naruto spoke, recognizing her chakra signature, knowing it was not Eni or Henge. He didn't know why she was here, but at this point he would not complain. Questions could be asked later. "I can sense several Umbu teams from Kumo beginning to make their way down the cliff. We must leave now." Kidamaru nodded but looked to the other injured shinobi. "And what about that one?" The words seemed to pierce the veil over her mind, and her eyes traveled to Naruto, his own eyes meeting her own with a strange emotion within them. "Leave her," he said with a small rumble vibrating through his chest, something that could only be described as a chuckle. Akina's eyes widened and her mouth opened to say something, but before she could, the two ninja grabbed their leader and leapt away, escaping from Kumo. Minutes later, Naruto's eyelids began growing heavy, his vision darkening. The new world. His faint voice escaped his unmasked lips, reaching the two ninja currently carrying him, causing them to look upon him with mild worry gracing their features. It should have been now. He gasped out before his head slumped forward, his world finally surrendering his struggle to remain awake. Chapter 55 VOL 3 Aftermath. "We need 12 cc's of adrenaline. We need to get his heart rate back up. Damn it, Kai, stops that blood flow." The voices drifted through his mind, like echoes off in the distance, barely reaching him as he struggled in and out of consciousness. White, bright light glared down on him, his eyes closing as they tried to shield his retinas from the harsh glare. There were people around him, blurred and indistinct, people he faintly recognized as those who were speaking. His body was heavy, everything felt numb, eyes unseeing and skin unfeeling. He seemed to float in this strange place, blood rising in his mouth as he coughed, feeling himself choke. "He has a fibular and femoral fracture in his right leg. His foot is also completely shattered." He heard another of the voices yell out, his mind too unfocused, too confused and too tired to categorize the injuries and the danger they presented as he normally would. Images passed through his mind's eye, faces distorted, diluted and unfocused. He couldn't understand, couldn't recognize. Dislocated shoulder, anterior cruciate ligament, as well as posterior cruciate ligament are both snapped, 6 broken ribs, 2 punctures on his left lung, as well as internal bleeding in his stomach and a ruptured spleen. As the voice faded in his ears, growing weaker and weaker, Naruto felt something tug at his arms, removing the armored gauntlets from their place, carefully however to leave the golden bands that held his seals firmly on his wrists. Another sound reached his ears. This was something else, something small, metal maybe falling against the floor. Naruto's head turned, his blue eyes opening for a moment, able to catch a brief glimpse of the butterfly pendant kept slightly beneath the armor resting on the cold floor of the tent before it was taken by one of the medics, and his eyes rolled to the back of his head, his body going lax as he finally gave into unconsciousness. "Yoshino." A strangled yell was pried from Kakashi's throat as one of the medics pulled out the large wooden piece of shrapnel firmly dug into his side. Kakashi didn't know why they hadn't used morphine, some complicated thing about him possibly dying due to the fatigue his system was already in. Or at least that was the gist of it. Whatever the reason, it hurt a lot, and the copy ninja was not happy. A short distance away, Guy watched the proceedings with some concern, his arms crossed but his features apathetic, dark brown eyes shifting to the drapes of the tent as 2 more forms suddenly entered. "Tayuya, Kidamaru." He greeted with a nod, receiving 2 in return. He continued. "Naruto-sama, did you Yeah, we found him, Green Man. Tayuya sighed, running a hand through her reddish-pink hair. Her hands were shaking a little as a shuddering sigh escaped her lips, obviously troubled deeply by what she'd seen. She leaned against one of the wooden posts that held up the med tent. Shit, it's been so long. I didn't even think anything could fuck him up anymore. Guy frowned as Kadamura nodded his agreement. Yeah. The six-armed shinobi continued for her. I mean, when we got there we expected, geez, I don't even know what we expected, but it sure wasn't that. He looked nearly dead. As an afterthought, he looked up to Kakashi, who was gripping the sides of his bed so tightly his knuckles were completely white, one of the medics at his side working frantically to remove all the remaining tiny little slivers of wood that had broken off from the main piece. You okay, Hataki? The former sound ninja questioned. Just peachy, was the gasp that escaped his lips before another pained groan escaped his lips as a shudder racked him. Kadamura winced as he caught sight of the nasty-looking wound on his side before turning to Guy. What about that blonde-haired one, the one Kakashi brought with him? What did you do with her? Guy nodded his assent of the younger man's question. She's from Suna, obviously our prisoner. I don't know the whole details, but I put her in another of the medical wards under heavy guard. Kadamura nodded. I see. Well, I'm going to set up a web perimeter around the camp, that way no one can sneak up on us. Tayuya, try to put a genjutsu over us as well. The last thing we need is for Kumo to attack us when we're so weak. The pink-haired Kunoichi nodded before she picked up her flute and walked out with her teammate. Guy watched them leave before he turned his eyes back to Kakashi. The copy ninja, heaving for breaths as he struggled against the blinding pain. What could have possibly happened out there? The taijutsu master questioned himself as he watched the medic work on Kakashi. They needed to move fast, back to Konoha in order to get a handle on the situation. Looking to one of the Chunin medics currently in the tent, Guy spoke in a serious tone. Give the word that we'll be breaking camp soon, once Naruto-sama is stable enough to transport. Liang and a contingent of Anbu hurriedly made their way down the side of the cliff, each trying to quickly assess and find the best route down. The stone and dirt that covered the side of the cliff could easily fall away when they stuck to it, leaving them grasping nothing but loose grains and plummeting to their deaths. The trek was dangerous, but Liang knew they had to hurry. It was imperative that they reach the rapidly fading presence they could sense at the bottom of the cliff. The Reikage looked around, watching as his Anbu tried to locate the quickest way down. They had seen the Kazekage up at the top, where he had told them of what had happened. Liang immediately ordered his men to escort the Suna leader back to Kumo, in order to give him medical treatment he obviously needed. The sleeping dragon felt a surge of impatience rise up in him. An unfamiliar sensation to the man who prided himself on near infinite amounts of said virtue and his calm demeanor in whatever situation. Glancing around, Liang saw a small stone outcropping of about 12 meters down, very small, but it seemed stable enough to withstand. So positioning himself properly, he cut off the flow of chakra to his feet, allowing himself to plummet the distance, ignoring the startled cries of his subordinates as he adjusted himself mid-air. He landed perfectly on the stone outcropping, feeling it shift uneasily beneath his feet for a moment, as if it were to collapse before it settled itself. Liang took a brief moment to chide himself for taking this risk, but it soon passed as he spotted another outcropping, this one also a few meters below him. Giving another leap, the Raikage landed on it. This time, however, the stone did give way, forcing Liang to grasp at the stone with his bare hand, chakra coating it, allowing him to stick to the surface. Even so, the surface continued to break off, forcing him to rapidly continue to grasp other stones still stuck to the cliff, in effect causing him to skid down the length of the cliff as his chakra continued to latch onto different stones that quickly gave way under his weight. Beads of sweat covered his brow as he descended, trying to keep up his concentration on slowing down, or altogether stopping his descent. He was certain that if his chakra control was not as advanced as it was, he'd probably have slipped and fallen to his death moments ago. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably just a few seconds, the ground was finally in view, having fallen past the veil of mist and cloud that hung within the ravine. Molding chakra into his legs, waist, and spine to absorb the impact without shattering his bones, Liang smashed against the ground, falling to his knees due to the impact that he was certain would have broken every bone in his legs if he were any weaker. Even so, they were quite visibly shaky as he picked himself up, breathing deeply in order to calm himself and evenly distribute oxygen throughout his body, which would result in dulling the pain quicker, as well as getting the muscles in his legs back up to speed. but as he straightened himself fully, he caught sight of her. Small specks of blonde hair peeking out from amidst dirt and blood, clothes torn, rocks digging into her back harshly, tiny little pebbles embedded deeply in its place. Her breathing uneven, unsteady, her eyes open yet unseeing. What had once been green grass beneath her now tainted red with her blood, pasty pale skin belying the amount she'd lost as he could feel the traces of the kitsune's chakra bubbling just beneath the surface. Apparently, even the great Kyubi could not single-handedly repair damage as extensive as this. He knelt down at her side, his hands ghosted over her form, as if afraid to touch her in this delicate state. His eyes took on a look of sadness as his eyes passed over her broken body again. "My dear child, what did he do to you?" His voice was barely above that of a whisper as he turned the younger girl onto her back, where he then proceeded to pick her up, cringing with something akin to pity as he heard the bones in her arms, as well as possibly her ribs, grind against one another with the slight movement, bringing a faint groan of pain from the girl's lips, even in her unconscious state. Placing one hand to gently support her head and neck as best he could, while the other went beneath her legs to pick her up bridal style, he became acutely aware of the fact that both her legs were broken given the extremely hot temperature of the areas his hands came in contact with. He wished they could get a stretcher down here, but even if they could get it back up with her on, it would be nigh impossible. One would be waiting at the top. Ignoring the blood that was now slowly seeping through his pristine white robes, Liang lifted them both up and again had to wince at the horrible sound of her arm falling limply to her side, crunching, scraping and grinding together as it did. Amazingly, another sound followed it, as well as slight movement from the injured girl. "Akina!" he called somewhat uncertainly. The younger girl's eyes fluttered, gaining focus on his face for a brief moment before she groaned again, her head falling limply onto one side, resting unsteadily on his shoulder. "Sensei, please." Her whisper was so low he struggled to hear it, but as the words reached his ears, he felt a pit form in his stomach before she fell again back into the black abyss of unconsciousness. "Tell me it's not true." The Konoha army in defeat, Uzumaki Naruto critically injured, the Kazekage missing. This news sent shock waves throughout the lands. As Naruto was safely transported back into the borders of the Fire Country, Jiraiya's stewardship of the lands came under siege as previously conquered lands came under full assault of political and civil uprising. Dozens of small pockets of resistance sprung up in Kusa, Aim, Taki, Odo, Kiri, Konoha itself, and most especially, the recently subjugated lands of Iwa. Rumors of Naruto killing the Kazekage quickly spread onto Suna, where Baki, the jounin in charge of Suna during the Kazekage's absence, quickly marshaled Suna's armies, with the support of the people, as well as the former Konoha shinobi, who finally saw a chance of bringing justice onto the man who had murdered their families. An outcry for justice spread through the land of wind, fanning the flames brought on by the spark that was the rumored assassination of their Kage. Baki himself is driven even more fiercely by the personal nature of his loss. Juga Liang soon capitalized on this, driving forward his men and marching them south, threatening the borders of Konoha and Iwa, as he placed large garrisons of troops in the fortresses of Sukumont and Umi, threatening both Konoha's northern border and Iwa's eastern border respectively, its navy also taking supply and trade ships along the Changjiang, which separated Kumo from the islands of Kiri. With their empire under full assault, the Demon King's empire found itself in the danger of collapse, almost as quickly as it was established. His eyes slowly opened, revealing the calm blue iris quickly focusing on his surroundings. He lay on a soft white bed, but the calm sound of a gently flowing river reached his ears, its unfamiliarity bringing him to full alertness as he sat up on the bed, realizing that the silks that he now wore were not familiar to him either. The bed he currently sat in stood in the middle of what must have been a giant lake, as he could see nothing beyond the horizon, and the surface was too calm to be a part of the thrashing waters of the ocean. He touched his face, the familiar weight of his mask missing, the cold steel of his gauntlets, no longer present either. He looked around again and this time managed to catch sight of a small, lonesome figure standing amidst the calm waters that glistened with the sunlight that fell over them. Tossing his legs over the edge of the bed, his bare feet came in contact with the water, finding it to be quite warm to the touch, the white silk which he was now dressed in almost blending in with his serene environment. Taking another look at the lone figure, he proceeded to make his way towards it. Slowly, ever so slowly, the figure came further and further into view as he came closer and closer to it. Its features soon became recognizable, until they were entirely unmistakable, even with its back to him. Just 4 feet away. Yoshino. The whisper of recognition barely left his lips before she turned to face him. Long flowing raven hair reaching her lower back, standing out in stark contrast to her bright blue eyes and silver silk dress. She looked older, somehow, since he'd last seen her, but it was unmistakable. He could never mistake her face. Those eyes, the same eyes that had looked upon him with softness, with kindness, with understanding. She looked at him then, when she fully turned. She looked at him, not at all surprised to see him. Her features were not twisted with rage or bitterness as they had been in their last encounter, but with a strange fondness, but laced with a somber undertone which rang strongly enough for him to see it with ease, even though she could never hide much from him. This is not real. He started, raising his chin slightly as he looked down at her. She was still shorter than him. Her eyes took on another look then, one he could not recognize as her features became even more somber. She stepped towards him. Naruto did nothing, even as she came within arm's reach, even as he felt her arms wrap around his waist and embrace him, he didn't move. The slow, rumbling sounds of thunder reached his ears as he felt her head rest against his chest and the rain pelt against their bodies. Strange he should not feel in a dream. He looked down on her, his eyes meeting the top of her head as he rested one hand atop the dark crown of her hair and moved the other to wrap loosely around her shoulders, holding her amidst the rain. In the waking world, Naruto laid in his bed, fully dressed with multiple bodyguards in and around the room, all hidden from view. 3 other figures sat around the room, watching over their young leader's recovering form. One was Jiraiya, who had been at the blonde's bedside since he arrived in Konoha nearly 1 week ago. Kakashi, who had arrived with him, still cradled his injured side tenderly so as not to tear open the stitches with any abrupt movement. And finally Hinata, who had been called back from Iowa by Jiraiya, leaving Shino in charge of the delicate situation that was Iwagakure. He wasn't sure if Naruto would appreciate the gesture, but he truly did not know whom else he could call at this point that would care on a personal level that Naruto was injured. The Hyuga, for her part, still seemed somewhat shell-shocked by the entire thing. Naruto, since she met him while they were still children, had always been the most indestructible being on the face of this earth. No matter how much she had trained or learned, she always felt as if she hadn't even come close to bridging the gap of power between them. No one could, even Jiraiya always seemed like he paled in comparison to him. To see him like this, to know that he had been injured, that he could be injured at all, it was a disheartening notion. She felt as if an odd security of sorts that had been there before had been torn out from under her. When will he wake up? She questioned, looking over to Jiraiya. Watching as the toad Sannin shrugged. Well, the doctors say that he may, amazingly, wake up sometime today or tomorrow. And which, considering the extent of his injuries, is a goddamn miracle as far as I'm concerned. A growl tore their attention back to the blonde as he shook his head, still asleep as he continued to thrash about a bit. It was not violent, but it was enough to worry them, which was seen as Hinata and Kakashi moved to gently, but firmly hold down his arms. Meanwhile, in the Hokage Tower, several individuals sat in one of the tower's many lounges. These men being Marino Ibiki, Midorishi Enko, Kagaya Kimimaro, Mado Gai, and Yuhi Kurenai, whom had been called back from her position in the reserves due to the situation, along with Tayuya, Kitamaro, and Sakan, having been sent away by Jiraiya, Takusa, and Kiri respectively to be the temporary overseers. The hope was that their higher ranking among the populace of Konoha's military would send a stronger message than other overseers who were most of the time merely a standard jounin, along with Jiroba having been sent to Oto in order to secure their power base in the location. Outside, rain pelted against the windows, bearing down on them gray clouds, darkening the sky and casting shadows over the village. An anti-Konoha coalition seems to be taking shape around Kumo and the Reikage. Ibiki began as he gestured towards a map that was laid out on the floor before them, with him, Kurenai and Enko on one side, Tayuya and Gai on the other, Kimimaro standing by the window as he calmly observed the rain pelting against the windshield. And the Suna forces show signs of an attack on the Kisatako garrison. He continued, gesturing to another area on the map. What of the prisoner, Gai? Kurenai questioned after a moment, turning to face the aforementioned man. The men at the hospital are keeping her unconscious with the use of medicine. They would like to wait for Naruto to give them the order on what to do with her, since she's apparently so important that Kakashi had to risk his life to get her here. Kurenai nodded in understanding. Before anything else could be said, Kimimaro straightened then, turning to the others as he made his way closer to them. Regardless of the condition of our lord, he began as he sat down. We have to do something immediately. Lady Kurenai should lead 3 squads of Umbu and head for Taki and aim to quell the unrest that is beginning to get a grip over the area. Ibiki and I should prepare our defenses here in case of the unlikely event that Kumo should be able to march its armies this far into our territory. At the same dash. Kimimaro. Anko interrupted with something akin to a hiss. Since when have we started taking orders from you? Kimimaro in response closed his eyes and sighed. This isn't the time for that. Impertinent bastard, aren't you? Anko questioned rhetorically, leaning back a bit. What we need right now is someone who can see us through this, or, Lady Anko, are you saying you have a better plan? The bone wielder started throwing a contemptuous glare in her direction. Snarling in anger, the snake mistress stood up and grabbed the bone wielder by his throat, despite the hand of one Mado guy that held her wrist. Why, you pompous little dash! Enough. Another voice cut in, this one bringing all their attention to the doorway. Naruto-sama! Were the surprised gasps that greeted his arrival, his single, red-clad form stepping forward with ease, Hinata, Kakashi, and Jiraiya at his side. He did not have his usual iron mask and hood on, for which some of them were thankful to see. But Naruto-sama, you're not well. Guy cried out in alarm, watching as the man he would have confused for dead 3 days ago walked past him and sat down at the head of the map where they all gathered. Mere flesh wounds, he grunted before he looked at Tayuya. Tayuya, sent to Sakan and Kiri for aid. His voice startled her out of her momentary shock, quickly bowing to his order. Of course, was her response before she left. Wasting little time, he turned to Guy. Guy, Kurenai, take 5 Chunin squads and 6 Jounin and head for IWA, assist Aburaim Shino, make sure you keep the reins of the area tight and that the Tsuchikage does not betray us. Ibiki, head south and direct the defense against Suna there, Kakashi will join you once he's fully recovered. Kidamaru, Anko, attack Kumo, draw them out of Odani Castle. His orders given, the men and women assembled bowed once, each responding with a chorus. Yes, sir, before they each made their way out of the room, ready to complete the orders they had been given. Once everyone but Jiraiya and Hinata left, Naruto stood up again before slowly walking towards the window. Have the recovery teams found the bodies yet? You mean Guan? Jiraiya questioned with no small amount of hesitation. At Naruto's nod, he continued. Yes, he and the rest of the men that were recovered are in the morgue now. Naruto nodded. I see. He paused, his cold blue eyes never losing their frigidness, his expression never even twitching. Jiraiya, I would like you to go and begin preparations for their service. At that the older man merely nodded, running a hand through his full head of hair. Yes, sure. He muttered to himself before he walked out the door, leaving Naruto and Hinata alone in the room. There was a silence between them, as Naruto merely stared out the window, and she watched his unmoving back. The silence stretched on for what seemed like an eternity until finally Naruto spoke. Hinata. Yes, Naruto-sama? She questioned as patient and calm as she could be. Tell me, Hinata, what would you do with a bird that refuses to sing? Caught completely off guard by the seemingly random question, Hinata stuttered and took a moment to regain herself. Excuse me, Naruto-sama? It's a simple question. What would you do with a bird that refuses to sing? He repeated, still staring out the window and the rain that continued to pelt the glass. The Hyuga heiress took a moment to think before she shrugged. Even little birds have their own mind and desires. If he does not want to sing now, then I would patiently wait for it to want to sing. Naruto nodded. I see. The silence once again stretched on between them before Hinata hesitantly asked. What would you do with it, Naruto-sama? He responded without hesitation. Kill it. Why would I do anything else? She resisted the urge to roll her eyes at her own stupidity. She should have known. Another silence stretched on before he broke it again. Hinata, send messages to Jinchiko, Toshiro, and Guan's apprentice, Mika. I believe her name was. If they so choose, they may return here to Konoha for the funeral service. The Hyuga clan head bowed. As you wish, she stated, though her tone indicated her sadness at the prospect. Guan, though hardly around given his duties in Kiri, had become something of a godfather to most of the younger people of their forces, much like Jiraiya had become something akin to a grandfather, and Kakashi an uncle. He was a calm, serious and distant godfather, but a godfather nonetheless. She too would mourn and miss him. Hearing the Hyuga heiress leave, Naruto continued to watch the rain, placing his bare hand against the delicate glass, the cold chill running up his hands. I will not let your death be in vain. A groan of pain reached Gaara's ears, startling him as he snapped his attention over to the form now slowly regaining consciousness on the bed. Kankuro! He said as he stood up, bringing his brother's attention towards him as he stood at the side of his bed, leaning down to stare into the puppet wielder's dazed eyes. Kankuro, for his part, only felt pain in his head, a sharp, throbbing sensation that felt as if his brain was being pressed against his skull. Gaara! He gasped before coughing. He tried to move his hand, but, to his immediate and immense horror, the appendage did not respond. Then he took another look around. He did not recognize this hospital. Fighting off an immediate surge of panic, Kankuro swallowed the thick lump that formed in his throat, realizing that it could just be the side effect of some form of medicine, or probably hoping for it, as he hesitantly spoke. Gaara, why? He swallowed again. Where are we? Why can't I move my legs? He questioned with a pit forming at the bottom of his stomach at the pained expression that came across Gaara's face. Kankuro. The redhead took a breath through his nostrils, all but steeling himself as his face took on the grim countenance of the Kazekage. Kankuro, you've been paralyzed from the neck down. We're in Kumo's hospital. Gaara's turquoise eyes showed their sorrow openly as Kankuro's own eyes stared blankly up at the ceiling, his mouth agape as he was trying to form words that seemed caught in his throat. Why are we in Kumo? The puppet wielder eventually ventured, startling his younger brother. You don't remember? At Kankuro's minute shake of the head, Gaara looked at Kankuro with a new wariness. Kankuro, what's the last thing you remember? The puppet wielder thought for a moment, and after several moments Gaara questioned again. Kankuro, what date is it? March 13th. He answered simply, but at Gaara's horrified look he knew that was not the date. Kankuro, it's April 15th. Gaara choked out. Kankuro had only been unconscious for 3 days. Gaara. Kankuro began swallowing another lump in his throat. Tell me everything that happened. Finally, a few minutes later, Kankuro spoke, somehow managing to choke out his words through the emotions now raging within him. And Temari, what happened to Temari? He questioned as he realized his sister was not in the room. At the question, Gaara's head fell and he closed his eyes even tighter, his face scrunching up as his brows knitted. He took her. Kankuro's eyes closed as tears shined at the side of his closed eyelids, a shuddering breath escaping his lips. Gaara looked at his brother's face before he slowly reached out and grasped his hand firmly on his own. Brother, I swear I won't let him get away with this. His voice held such conviction, such a strong determination, and for a moment Kankuro truly believed he would fulfill his promise. At the sight of Gaara's reassuring hand grasping his own, he allowed the tears he had been trying to hold back fall down the sides of his face. He couldn't even feel his brother's fingers. In another room, Zhuge Liang stood above Akina's slowly rousing form, the impeccable white robes blending in seamlessly with the surrounding white walls. His raven black hair is in stark contrast to everything around him. He watched her eyes slowly flutter open, shifting left and right in order to look around the room before they finally landed on him, the dazed, lost look in her eyes causing him to stiffen somewhat. Sensei. Her voice was hoarse as tears slowly began flowing down her cheeks, sorrow bordering on the edges of despair lining her features. Yes? He questioned. He knew what she was going to ask, but he had to make sure. Sensei, she paused. Please tell me that he was lying, Sensei. Her face twisted in pain, but not from her injuries as she stared at his impassive face. Please tell me he's not my brother. Liang closed his eyes with a sharp intake of breath. He had been hoping against it, but hope was a fool's game. He looked into her eyes for a brief moment before looking away. He could lie to her, tell her that he was indeed lying. But he wouldn't. For one thing, it would only dig him in deeper, because despite her words she would not just drop this here if he says so, she would look again and she would discover him. But also, some part of him admitted that he did owe her this much. He was willing to withhold information from her, but he was not willing to lie to her. That was a line even he was not willing to so callously cross. He sighed as he shook his head. I'm afraid that it is no lie, my dear, he was telling you the truth. He watched her reaction carefully as her breath hitched, her eyes gaining such a deep look of betrayal and utter hurt that it made his own heart twist with something akin to guilt at the sight. Yo, how long have you known? She questioned as she looked away from him, her eyes sweeping over the bed sheets as she asked the question, swallowing the lump in her throat as she did. Since before you arrived in Kumo, he answered truthfully, never making any other movements, though to the trained eye, it was clear he was ready for the reaction he knew would come as she saw her grip the bed sheets tightly. 9 years? She questioned in something akin to horror, red beginning to seep into the white sheet firmly in her grip as her nails punctured her skin, her knuckles turning white as she shook. You knew that he was my brother? For 9 years? Yes. He answered with another nod, already feeling the red yuki of Kyubi's chakra rising up to the surface, bubbling beneath her skin as it shimmered around her. You trained me, you were going to use me to kill him. This time it wasn't a question, and the new feeling of anger was beginning to overshadow her betrayal, as could be seen by the red chakra which was now uncontrollably rising from her. Yes. He answered anyway. Would you ever have told me about Liang? He took note of the use of his name. She never called him by name. Always sensei, still he should expect no different. No. A simple answer to a simple question. Her eyes snapped up to him then, the animal red brimming with tears that freely streamed down her face, the sorrow and pain of her features a stark contrast to the deep white-hot rage that burned deeply in her eyes that showed an equally great amount of rage and pain. Before he knew what was happening, she had lunged from the bed, claws extended with a cry as she swiped at him. Acting quickly, he leaned away from her arm continuing until it struck the wall, stone and concrete giving way under the force of the blow, revealing the remains of the city through the opening before she spun around towards him, her speed momentarily surprising him as she delivered a harsh, sharp kick that connected solidly with his chest, sending the wreckage slamming into the weak wall of dried plaster. The startled cry of nurses breached the thin barriers as fine cracks appeared on the other side. Before she was able to come at him again, the Umbu were there, swiftly holding her down as she struggled against them. Sobs tore themselves from her throat as she screamed and struggled, glaring deeply into the sleeping dragon's eyes, allowing him to see the pain, the hurt, the anger, but most of all the question of why, shining deep within her eyes. How could you? He heard her scream amidst her struggles. How could you bastard? She howled and thrashed, nearly hurling her captors right off. I trusted you. Her struggles were intense even as the wounds previously inflicted on her reopened themselves, blood seeping through her bandages. Liang watched her with seeming indifference. But one could tell he was slightly worried about her, for whatever reason that may be. Finally her struggles began to die down, her breathing becoming labored as she coughed up blood, tears still flowing freely down her face and dripping onto the floor. Falling to her knees as she continued to cry, still held in Gaara's sand. How could you? She asked one final time, blood falling from her lips and onto the cold hospital floor before she finally gave into the darkness that crept along the edges of her vision. The medics came soon after carrying a stretcher. Thanks for watching. I hope you had as much fun with this epic what if as I did creating it. Make sure to smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a single twist in the story. Drop your thoughts, theories, or even your wildest ideas in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're craving more awesome Naruto content, be sure to check out the other videos on the channel, because there's plenty more heat waiting for you. Until next time, stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember, even a shadow clone needs love.